그럼 뭐 의사님 많이 경험하신 것처럼 기타를 쓰면 엠파타나 유머블이나 자연처럼 흡했을 때 차이가 나는 것들 같은 유용하게 적용할 수가 있을 텐데 어떻게 적용하고 있느냐고 좀 들어보는 것 같습니다.
So we have a very unique combination of things, the T-scan and the EMG, which I'm going to demonstrate a little later on today. They work together to analyze occlusal problems in the natural teeth. And of course, the T-scan is a great aid in implants and a great aid in case finishing orthodontics.
T-scan이나 뭐 교정 치료 후에 교합 교정할 때 쓸 수가 있을 거고 예전에 지난번하고 달라진 건 EMG하고 프로그램상에서 같이 싱크로되면서 나타날 수 있는 건 큰 차이점일 것 같아요.
So I'm a consultant for the TechScan Corporation, which is based in Boston, Massachusetts. I've been working with the T-scan since 1984, and I've published about 45 peer-reviewed articles on TMD applications of the T-scan. And I've published many clinical articles on different applications of the T-scan, like implants and condentation. But I do not receive any compensation for sales of the TechScan product.
네, 뭐 개발 뭐 옛날 레지던트 할 때부터 관심 가지고 하시고 지금 이런 것처럼 클리니컬 컨설턴트를 일하시면 쉐어가 있거나 하는 것은 아니고 당신의 이제 경험을 피드백하기도 하고 또 이제 그런 역할을 하고 계시는 거죠.
So the T-scan is a unique solution, a unique occlusal solution, because it allows you to see changing forces across time, and no other occlusal indicator can do that.
특징이라는 게 그거죠. 타임에 따라 가지고 달라지는 것들을 보여줄 수 있는 뭐 다른 디바이스들은 없기 때문에 그런 것들을 넣을 수 있는 거죠.
And it measures between the teeth 256 levels of force, which can be adjusted to fit a patient's bite strength. So if you have a weak patient, you can change the gradient so it reads the forces of a weak patient. If it's a strong patient, you can turn the gradient down so you can measure their forces, and therefore it can be applied to almost any patient.
이게 우리 보는 거 센시티비티를 갖다 조정해가지고 그 레인지를 갖다 바꿔줄 수가 있잖아요. 바꿔줄 수가 있는데 바뀐 그 범위 내에서 2, 5, 6단계로 해가지고 구분해가지고 하는 거니까 저녁에 센 환자든지 약한 환자든지 모든 경우에 저게 이제 그 절대량을 재지 못한다라고 하는 약점일 수도 있지만 반대로 얘기하면 그 환자에 맞는 정확한 이별레이션 할 수 있다라고 하는 장점일 수도 있는 거죠.
Until it was developed in 1984, there was no way to measure between the teeth. No way to measure forces, no way to measure time.
시간 관련돼 있는 걸 갖다 초창기에 나왔을 때도 지금 두께 때문에 이런저런 말들이 있었지만 그 절대량을 재는 것보다 다른 방법으로 잴 수 있는 것 없는 것들을 갖다 측정한다는 게 이제 의미가 있는 거예요.
And what it gives you is color-coded force designations, where high is pink and low is blue and 256 levels in between.
레인지에 따라 색깔이 달리는 걸 아실 거고.
But how you use it is you compare it to articulating paper marks so that you can choose the correct marks to treat.
그래서 이제 사용하는 방법은 점 찍고 나면 어딘지 알지만 저기 치아에서 어딘지 모르니까 벽좀 써가지고 마킹되어 있는 걸 갖다 연관 지어가지고 작업하는 거 필요하겠죠, 당연히.
So in this scan, there are two very high forces, one at the distal of the 2.7 and one at the distal of the 1.7. But if you look at the carbon paper marks, you see a large mark here, but you don't see a large mark here. And that's because the marks don't measure force. They just measure contact size.
이제 저 환자의 경우에 스캔으로 보니까는 왼쪽에 그러니까 어쨌든 교합지로 찍히는 것들이 그 컨택되고 있는 에리어를 이제 보여주는 거고 결과적으로. 근데 오른쪽에 있는 것처럼 뭐 보여주지 못하는 경우들도 있고 그런 것도 잘 구분해가지고 하는 거 필요한 거죠, 임상에서는.
And the T-scan helps you clarify this because when you have other equally sized marks, for example, this mark on the distal of the 2.4, is equal in size to the mark on the distal of the 2.7, but the force gradient is very different. Low force versus high force.
교합지를 결과를 저렇게 나타나게 되면 우리가 알 수가 없는 거잖아요. 저 같은 교합지로 확인될 수 있는 범위 내에서는 같은 컨택이 있다는 걸 알려주지만 그 컨택 사이에 그 강도나 시차에 대한 것들을 알 수가 없는 것을 T스캔이 보여줄 수 있다는 게 차이점이겠죠.
So the problem we face in dentistry every day in practice is which marks mean what and how to understand them.
그래서 임상에서 날마다 하는 일이긴 하지만 그러면서도 이제 소위 얘기하는 뭐 임상적인 경험이라는 말로 그냥 묻어가지고 가긴 하지만 정확한 진단의 툴로서 교합지만 사용하기는 좀 제한점이 많은 그런 거 인정을 해야 될 것 같아요.
So this mark here is equal in size to this mark and to this mark, but they all have different forces.
사이즈 같지만 힘이 다른 것, 힘의 강도가 다른 것들, 이 특별한 케이스에서는 알 수가 있고.
And these marks here, which are smaller, are actually equal in force to this mark.
사이즈 작은데 사이즈 크기가 이제 힘의 강도를 나타내지 않는다라는 건 뭐.
As you can tell by the color coding.
컬러 코드로 나타내는 거예요.
So the challenge for us in daily practice is how to interpret these marks intelligently so we can choose the correct ones to treat. And the T-scan makes that very simple for you.
임상에서는 T스캔 도움 없이 하게 된다면 이제 날마다 이제 그 추리를 해가지고 잡아야 되는 것들이 있는데 T스캔 쓸 경우에는 그런 것도 조금 더 쉽게 결정할 수 있도록 도와줄 수 있는 에이드 디바이스가 될 수 있는 거죠.
But without the T-scan, in this case, we might treat this contact. We wouldn't treat this contact because we might think it was light force because there isn't a big mark. We might think this one is forceful, but it's actually very low force. And you can see how confusing that would be to you on a daily basis.
그러면 이제 우리가 같은 사이즈니까 같이 스위트하면 안 되는 걸 뻔할 텐데 어떻게 고를지는 알 수가 없는 건 것이죠.
So the T-scan is very reproducible. It's been shown in studies to be able to measure force repeatedly, reproduce the test occlusion over and over and over again.
재현성이 굉장히 높은 디바이스고.
And none of these indicators offer you the insight that the T-scan offers you.
What is silicone?
Silicone, yes. Shim stock, articulating paper.
How to use the silicone material to check the
I don't use it, so I think, but essentially people make a mixture of it, put it on the teeth, have the patient bite through it, and they use, again, the biggest mark or the biggest hole being the most forceful, which of course is not true.
Yeah.
The most common one we use is articulating paper. And articulating paper, we are taught that it measures force by its size. But studies in the literature show that's clearly not the case. It doesn't have that capability. It's just ink that smears on the teeth.
뭐 많이 배울 때 그거 이제 혼동하기 쉬운 거예요, 그렇지? 실제 우리가 배우는 것들은 실제로 닿는 부위가 어딘지 갖다 알려주기 위해서 볼사이라는 얘기도 하고 여러 가지 얘기를 하잖아. 그걸 갖다가 강도하고 누구도 강도하고 연관되어 있다고 얘기는 안 했지만 당연히 강도하고 연관되어 있을 거로 생각하는 거가 있고 말 나온 김에 하나 조심하셔야 되니까 지르코니아인 것 같아. 지르코니아가 똑같이 컨택이 안 일어나잖아요, 그렇지? 컨택이 안 일어나기 때문에 컨택이 없는 것도 아니고 교합지가 찍히는 양상도 다르기 때문에 인터프리테이션 하는 건 굉장히 중요할 것 같아요.
So the T-scan sensor can be used in many shapes in industry. It's actually many applications. The first type that it was ever made was the T-scan bite sensor, but you can use it in foot analysis. See, the colors are the same, and the United States government actually uses them to surround nuclear warheads in trucks. So when they drive trucks around streets, like in Seoul, they don't hit a bump and blow up in the truck. So they're very powerful devices, the T-scan sensor.
뭐 센서가 치과 쪽에 나 아까 들었는데 치과 쪽에 이용되기 때문에 T-스캔이라고 그런 거 같고 딴 데 이용되는 건 또 다른 인식을 쓰는 것 같아요. 마지막에 얘기했던 것들은 왜 미술 포기가 할 때 무진동차 하고 갈 때 그 바닥면에 그 충격이 어떻게 이용이 되는지 같은 그런 것도 있고 아까 그 닥터 쇼를 발바닥 하는 것들도 이제 똑같은 원리가 적용이 된다는 거고.
Yes, this device is designed to measure your foot pressures and to give you correct orthotic that you can buy from this kiosk. So there are a number of prosthodontic applications. One of the most helpful ones is determining painful contacts on a tooth at store. Like someone says, well, I chew and this tooth hurts me. You can readily find the contact with the T-scan. Very difficult without the T-scan, but readily with the T-scan. You have all kinds of case finishing prosthodontics, and today we'll talk about implants and removable prosthodontics.
네, 오늘 얘기할 거는 임플란트 그리고 두 가지 특징이 이제 자연치아가 걸리게 될 경우에 자연치아하고 덴처나 자연치아하고 임플란트가 이제 아시는 것처럼 메카니컬한 거동이 다른데 그런 것들을 어떻게 적용해갈 수 있는지가 설명해 주시고요.
And then there's adjusting natural teeth, very effective, the T-scan. Installing splints and night guards, also improved with the T-scan. And it can be employed with all different combinations of dental materials. There's no limit to what you can use it with. Composite, denture materials, zirconia, gold, post-infused metal, all ceramic materials. There's no limit.
물리는 압력을 갖다가 측정하는 거기 때문에 재료나 그런 거에 상관없는 건 당연하겠죠.
And what it does is it allows you to map the forces and choose the contacts to treat intelligently, rather than by interpreting this subjectively.
객관적으로 측정이 돼 있는 걸 가지고 해석을 하는 거기 때문에 감각에 의존하거나 그런 거 없이 주관적으로 해석하는 것보다는 사이언티픽하다고 얘기할 수 있을 거고.
And the newest version actually has a implant warning feature that will tell you if there's an implant that's being overloaded. And that way you can be drawn to it automatically by software marking it for you.
Should we before we measure which one would be the implant or just program automatically detect?
That's a good question. When you send up the patient file, you mark the teeth that are implants within the patient file. And then when the forces are too great and it's on an implant, it automatically measures it for you.
들으신 대로 이제 어떤 놈이 임플란트를 갖다 미리 환자 이름지 볼 때 알려주고 나면 이제 그 양을 비교해가지고 미리 워닝을 줄 수 있다는 거죠.
So here you can see, there's many articulating paper marks, but only a few of them are high force. And of course, that's what the software helps you determine, which ones are and which ones aren't.
뼈줄 여러 개 집혔지만 그중에서 어떤 놈이 의미 있게 봐야 될지 갖다가 소프트웨어가 알려줄 수 있는 거죠.
An example of how someone might choose incorrectly is this contact on the 3-4, which over here you can see is very low force, right, even though it's a large mark. And here you have the smaller mark on the 1-4, or the 4-4, excuse me, and you can see it's much higher force.
비합치시켰을 때 34, 44가 비슷하게 찍히지만 스캔을 보니까 44가 의미 있게 높다라고 하는 걸 갖다가 알 수가 있는 거고 비합치만 가지고 알 수가 없는 거죠.
So implant survival rates are quite good. They basically osseointegrate 95% of the time. But when you put occlusion on them, you see a much higher failure rate of the dental materials, 3 to 6 times higher.
지적이 나오는 내용이랑 미시하고 인터뷰 내용이라고 되어 있는데 노압이 이제 걸리고 난 다음에 훨씬 더 이제 페일리어 레이시 높아지는 것 같죠.
And that's has a lot to do with the rigidity of the systems. So we try to do a number of things to make implant prostheses work better. And those are, using mostly abutments and not pontics, staggering implants so they're not in a straight line, increasing the width of the implants, minimizing pontics, decreasing the width of the occlusal table, removing cantilever contact, minimizing lateral excursive contacts, and minimizing bruxing effects.
디자인할 때는 저런 여러 가지를 통해가지고 임플란트가 스트레스를 갖다가 줄이는 옵션들을 생각할 수 있지만
But all of those things don't counteract the pressure that occurs when teeth come together. You can have a small pontic or no pontics and have a small occlusal table, and the tooth can still be struck very forcefully. That has nothing to do with the interface pressures.
저거가 이제 다 저런 식으로 하시면 결국 중요한 거는 그 대학 최고의 계면에서 이제 압력일 텐데 그걸 갖다가 그거가 이제 반영이 돼 있는 건 아니잖아요. 어떻게 얘기하면 균일하게 딱 컨택이 된다라고 할 때 저런 것들이 이제 줄 수는 옵션은 되는 거지만 전제 자체가 좀 다른 거죠.
So this is why we see a very high failure rate. This paper reported 70% of their implant restorations had some kind of breakage after three years in service. So the breakage rate is very high because of system rigidity, and studies show that the forces do not travel down the side of the implant, but they bounce back at the occlusal materials. So this is why the bone support is maintained, but the breakage occurs in the occlusal materials and in the abutments and in the screws, things that are above the bone level.
그러니까 이제 저게 본대로 그 픽스의 서바이벌 레이스는 어떨지 모르지만 이 컴플리케이션이 많이 생기는 이유를 조금 설명할 수 있는 거고 그만큼 교합에 대한 것들이 컴플리케이션을 줄이기 위해 가지고 굉장히 중요하게 생각을 해야 되는 거죠.
So the rigidity is one component, but the other component is undetected occlusal force excess.
아까 이제 그 리지던트라고 하는 것들은 설계되어 있는 것들이 알 수가 있겠지만 우리가 굉장히 중요한 것 중에 하나가 저런 오클리어 포스가 있었을까 하는 그게 이제 디텍션 되지 못했을 때 문제가 생기는 거죠.
So undetected occlusal force excess is due to the fact that articulating paper, which we commonly use, doesn't measure force.
그러니까 뭐 그걸 계속 쓰지만 사이즈 가지고 포스 갖다가 직접 연관하는 게 아니기 때문에 어려움이 있는 거고.
So there are numerous studies in the literature that show that there is no relationship between force and carbon paper.
carbon paper를 쓸 수 있는 여러 가지가 뭐 포스하고 직접 상관이 없다는 거 여러 페이퍼가 얘기하고 있고.
And in essence, any one of these marks could be low force or high force. So the challenge for us is to know which one is high force and which one is low force.
그러니까 이제 임상에서는 좀 찍고 난 다음에 조정하고 난 다음에 모르고 스캔 안 쓴다고 하면 이제 며칠 지내보고 난 다음에 조직의 반응이 어떤지 보고 알 수밖에 없는 문제가 있는데 스캔 쓴다면은 약 조정하는 그 시점에서도 이제 우리가 결정을 해줄 수 있는 뭐 유용성이 있는 거죠.
So despite the research that shows there is no relationship between size of a paper mark and occlusal force, we still teach these concepts in almost every country in the world, that paper mark size has something to do with force, when there's no science to back it up at all.
뭐 벽지 두께에 대한 얘기도 많이 하지만 그게 실제로 일어나는 컨택이 어딘지에 대한 얘기들만 하고 있지만 뭐 직관적으로 의식 중에 막 큰 것들, 막 그 진하게 찍힌 것들이 이제 포스가 높을 거다라고 하는 도구마에 빠져 있다는 거죠.
So when you look at something like this same patient with the T-scan, you see that the size of a mark and the load has no relationship. So let me just play.
잘 해석을 하시면 저렇게 볼사이처럼 가운데 비지 않고 잘 찍힌 거가 실제로 이제 갭이 있는 컨택인데 그걸 갖다 그렇게 생각을 해석을 못하는 거죠.
So you can see that things don't happen at the same time, even though the marks say they do at the same time. And you can see the variability in the forces, which we match them up to the paper marks. The largest ones aren't the most forceful. There's a tall one, not the biggest mark. There's a large one, it's moderate force. So there's variability in the sizes and there's variability in the force. There's no way to correlate.
벽체 사이즈하고 그 피스를 찍었을 때 폴스의 크기하고 구분이 안 되는 걸 다시 보여주고 있고.
So in this example, the largest mark is here on the 2.5, and that happens to be the lowest force.
지금 제일 분명히 찍히고 큰 거가 이제 폴스가 크지 않다는 걸 다시 볼 수가 있죠.
So the question becomes, how would you know what these mean without this information?
디스캔 없이 그런 걸 갖다 확인할 수가 없는 거죠. 찔러놓고 난 다음에 다음은 터지고 남았습니다.
And the answer is we don't know. And the problem is we face this every day when we mark teeth and try to determine force. And we can be misled.
날마다 하고 있는데 그런 것들 갖다가 이제 우리 개심해가지고 하고 있다라고 하는 돌아오게 되는 것 같고.
Like in this case. We have 3 large marks, exposed dentin, small paper marks, counterpart 3 large marks, exposed dentin. But here's the case when measured with the T-scan. So you can see there's huge force and there's no ink. And there's low force and there's a lot of ink.
이것도 아까 얘기한 지코니아와 비슷한 상황인데 덴틴이 노출됐을 때 그 서페이스 캐릭터에 따라 가지고 배합지 마크가 묻어 있고 남아 있고 하는 것들이 쉽게 생각하면 뭐 드라이 시키는 것도 굉장히 중요하지만 서페이스 머티리얼에 따라 가지고 찍히는 것들이 같지 않다는 걸 알 수가 있죠.
What actually happens is the ink gets destroyed under high pressure, just like food gets destroyed under high pressure. And when there's low force, the ink survives. That's why you see a lot of ink here, but you see low force.
그 교합지의 그 물감이 어떻게 치면에 남게 되는지 갖다가 좀 잘 한번 생각해 보시면 좋은데 그건 사실 교합지마다도 좀 달라요. 교합지 매트릭스가 뭐로 되어 있는지 다르고 여러분 쓰는 것 중에 실코니아 쓸 때는 보통 쓰고 있는 바우쉬 써가지고 안 묻잖아. 두께가 두꺼운 것들에도 성긴 걸로 되어 있는 걸 써야 묻잖아요. 그것처럼 여기도 우리가 불사이 얘기했던 것도 뭐죠. 실제로 컨택되고 있는 데는 맞지 않고 교합지 두께만큼 있는 부위에 갭이 있어야 이제 실제로 물감이 남아있게 되는 건 거지.
Essentially, there's so much pressure that the ink cannot stay between the teeth.
남아있지 못하게 되는 거죠. 이건 프레셔 해가지고 없어졌다고 얘기하지만 그런 것보다도 물감이 묻어 있는지 아닌지를 생각하는 거죠.
So what this means to the implant restoration is that the clinician tries to choose force looking at ink. He may not choose correctly, which means that forceful contacts are left in place at delivery because ink doesn't measure the force, and that leads to problems after insertion.
임플란트가 이제 아까 위에를 봤던 것처럼 그 교합 로딩하면서 프레셔 주는 거, 프레셔가 이제 걸리는 거 굉장히 중요할 텐데 교합지만 가지고 있을 때 그걸 갖다가 알기가 쉽지 않은 한계점들이 있는데 이제 있음에도 불구하고 이제 날마다 영상에서는 뭐 알 수 있죠.
So that means we can install a damaging force profile, as in this case. This patient had an over prosthesis made that comes in and out of the mouth on these copings, and they kept breaking the porcelain off of the right first molar. And when you look at the T-scan data, this is how it was set up. It left the office with this extreme force.
전체적인 것 같은 프로파일이라는 단어를 써가지고 얘기하는 것 같은데 아까 본 대로 그 저장압, 멋을 생긴 저장압이 공포하는 것들이 어느 한 곳에 집중되어 있는 거를 방치하게 되면 여러 이제 메커니컬한 컴플리케이션들이 생길 수밖에 없는 거죠.
So this led to breakage, repeated breakage. So with the T-scan, you can eliminate this problem because it shows you which teeth are forcible and which teeth aren't, which contacts are and which contacts aren't. And then you choose them intelligently rather than looking at the ink as if it's explaining something to you.
결국은 뭐 우리가 보초를 하고 보초하는 것들이 교합에 대한 것들을 보는 거고 교합에서 뭐 여러 가지 보시고 포스 같은 컨트롤하는 거 필요한데 그런 것도 컨트롤 안 됐을 때는 결국은 뭐 메커니컬 페일리어가 증가하는 것들 갖다가 우리가 방치하게 되는 가져오게 되는 피할 수 없다는 거죠.
So what we do is we use the T-scan data to determine the force profile, and then we match it to the locations on the teeth so that we choose wisely which contacts to correct.
뭔가 이제 주관적으로 감각적으로 한다는 건 굉장히 정확할 것 같지만은 에러가 많은 거죠. 티스캔 찍어가지고 맵핑을 해가지고 우리가 손을 봐야 될 컨택이 어딘지가 인터넷하게 분명하게 볼 수 있는 거가 유용성일 거고.
And you can see in this case, if you went by ink size, you would not treat these two contacts. You'd be treating other contacts which aren't actually high force.
그러니까 저거 갖다가 사이즈만 가지고 한다고 생각하면 정작 제거해야 될 부분을 남기고 나머지 부분을 갖다 제거하는 부분이겠죠.
This is why people have trouble with occlusion. It's not that you can't understand occlusion as a science. It's that picking marks by paper is not a good way to practice. It's not predictable.
인자분인들 생각하시는 사람들이 왜 교합을 어렵게 생각하는지라고 하는 거에 대한 이해인데 교합을 결국 포스에 따라가지고 달라질 텐데 포스를 갖다 매주할 방법이 없었기 때문에 내가 이렇게 치료를 했는데 결과는 내가 예측한 대로 안 나오는 거야. 그게 당연히 그렇게 될 수밖에 없었던 것들이 티스캔 없이 프레셔를 갖다 인디케이팅 할 수 있는 디바이스 없이 교합을 갖다 조정한다고 하는 것들이 교합 이론을 갖다가 적용하는 데 있어가지고 한계점들이 있을 수밖에 없다는 거죠.
So with the complete arch implant prosthesis, we want to try to eliminate occlusal force excess, center the forces, and create low force uniformity throughout the prosthesis.
그러니까 전압을 갖다 임플란트 한다고 하면 그대로 익세스함을 제거하고 킵의 이제 벡터의 합은 중심적으로 가도록 하고 그다음에 로우 포스 전반적으로 어느 한 군데 집중되지 않도록 교합을 갖다가 맞춰주는 것들 그런 것들이 목표가 되는 거고.
So in this prosthesis, this is a lower fixed bridge on 3 implants and an upper denture. The upper denture actually has 2 rigid elements, a natural tooth root in the 1-1 and an ERA attachment in the 1-3. And these will concentrate stress more than will the soft tissue bearing areas.
이제 PH된 하나는 자연식 하나는 ERA 붙어 있는 거니까 적용을 뭐 심리적으로 잘 안 해주면 당연히 ERA 스트레스가 집중할 수밖에 없겠죠.
So when you use the T-scan and you're installing this, you work in series. So you record and then you match the data to the carbon paper marks and then you adjust and then you re-record and you match the carbon paper marks and you adjust and you re-record until you have a good end result.
그래서 그것도 사실 고민이긴 한데 여러분들 리우버블 갖다 집어넣을 때도 보면 이제 내면의 핏에 대한 걸 많이 얘기하지만 세미나 시간에도 얘기하는 것들이 교합을 안정시키는 것들이 굉장히 필요한데 아까 본 것처럼 티스캔과 교합치를 잘 조합하고 리우버블처럼 이렇게 한두 개의 자연치아가 있는 경우에 힘을 갖다 균형되도록 하기 위해 가지고는 딜리버리하는 날이 시간이 오래 걸릴 수밖에 없는 거죠. 지금 뭐 그 시간을 갖다 줄이려고 하기 위해 가지고는 뭐 대충 뭐 맞춰주고 써보시면 아픈데 드러날 거라고 얘기하는 것보다는 이 양반 얘기 들으니까 뭐 거의 트라이하는 시점이 딜리버리하는 게 1시간 정도 걸린다고 하더라고요. 이게 이제 마킹하고 조정하고 또 이제 티스캔 찍어보고 하다 보니까 시간이 걸리는 것이죠.
So in the first try in that delivery, there's very high pressure where the ERA and the natural tooth root are, and you can see fairly sizable paper marks there. And then we adjust that, and then we have new high forces to treat.
두 번째로 다른 부위가 먼저 많이 났던 데는 없어지고 상대적으로 다시 높게 찍히는 부위가 프레셔가 진행돼 걸리는 부위가 나타난 거죠.
You can see this is a very small mark. This is a moderately sized mark.
사이즈와 상관없이 전략이가 나타나고.
So we would adjust only those 2 contacts.
그리고 내가 제가 하고.
And then again make a new recording. And again, the T-scan will illustrate where the high pressure is versus the low pressure. And then we adjust again. And ultimately, by going through this kind of process of choosing only the mark that matches the highest force or the next highest force, we can end up with a fairly uniform force distribution.
한두 군데 집중되는 것도 없애주고 가능한 이분하게 될 수 있도록 컨트롤 맞추는 거죠. 그리고 이제 딜리버리 한 거죠.
And this case probably took 5 or 6 recordings and took maybe 20 minutes to do with the T-scan. And where the ERA and the natural root are slightly more force than the rest of the prosthesis.
그래서 이제 뭐 상대적으로 아까 ERA하고 자연치 있던데 폴스 나타나지만 다른 것도 이제 비슷한 정도의 폴스가 걸리는 거 상태가 돼가지고 이제 이걸 마친 거고요.
Now then, 13 months later, the patient came back for recall, and I always scan these patients again to see how they're doing. And sure enough, wear and tear on the prosthesis created a force imbalance in this region. And by adjusting that first grouping in the lower anterior region, the posterior implants now, after relieving this, became high force. And you see the implant warnings telling us to be wary of this.
During this series of examination, you don't touch any sensitivity.
That's a good question. Once you set the sensitivity correctly and you're going to adjust, you leave it where it is so that as you lower forces, it becomes visible. Right? If you change the sensitivity, you'll affect that reduction in forces.
아까 얘기한 거가 이제 처음에 제가 마지막 거가 있었잖아요. 로우 포스로 이분하게 프로파일 갖다가 만들어주는 거가 있기 때문에 처음 찍었을 때 그 센시티비티 조정해놓고 난 다음에 안 건드리고 해야 최종 목표까지 도달할 수가 있을 것 같겠죠.
So this, went through the same kind of corrective sequencing, and still after treating these areas, there's still implant overload, and this is the beauty of the T-scan. It shows you that it's not corrected yet.
새 버전에 나타나는 것 같은데 임플란트가 어느 채라고 찍어주고 나면 시계 분포를 봐가지고 거기 로딩 많이 걸릴 것 같다는 워닝이 뜬다고 하네요. 임플란트에 조정하라고.
And then after another correction, we have it very similar to how it was at delivery, with slight force increase where the rigid elements are. And the importance of the recall adjustment is that you can manage these force problems across time and preserve the prosthesis. So when we have teeth and implants in the same arch, we have different goals. We want to try to create a delay of the implants to load after the natural teeth by a small amount of time and leave the implants with a low force profile.
자연체하고 임플란트가 섞여 있는 경우라면 이제 최종적인 목표가 보시는 것처럼 자연체가 PDL이 있으니까 PDL은 타임 딜레이를 갖다가 활용을 하고 그다음에 임플란트 후에도 바이텍스 때 로포스 프로파일이 남도록 포스가 많이 걸리지 않도록 하는 걸 최종 목표로 해가지고 격추적인 거고요.
And we try to keep the total force summation away from the implants if possible.
또 하나는 이게 여러 부위의 포스의 합이 가운데 점찍히는 거 있잖아요. 가운데가 아니고 아마 임플란트가 한쪽에 있다라고 하면 이게 임플란트보다 멀어진 쪽에 중심점이 가도록 조정을 해야겠다라고 하는 것 같아요. 그건 아마 임플란트 쪽이 감당할 수 있는 포스가 세니까 그쪽을 갖다 로포스로 조정해 놓고 나면 그렇게 가지 않을까 싶은데.
So we also want to remove excursive contacts because they create shear stress, and that really applies to posterior implants. Anterior implants are very often involved in the protrusive movement or the lateral movements because of where they sit in the arch. So removing lateral stress really applies to the posterior implants.
전치부야 프로트루전이나 들어갈 때 걸리지 않도록 하는 것들이 다른 거거든요. 근데 부치부 같은 경우에는 메탈로 걸리지 않도록 해가지고 시어 스트렝스가 걸리지 않도록 조정해 주는 것 필요할 거고.
So time delay is where you have the front teeth strike first and the implants make contact fractions of seconds later.
어떻게 저렇게 하라고 지금 배우고 있나? 어떻게 하고 있어요? 그래서 이제 뭐 1초가 안 되는 시간 동안 차이를 두고 이제 나중에 컨택이 되도록 하는 거죠.
And that's possible because the periodontal ligament of the natural teeth will allow the teeth to depress into the socket a small amount. And that will allow you to then bring the implants into contact.
저 친구의 피델이 있기 때문에 포스와 분란을 주저앉는 게 있기 때문에 1초 미만의 속도, 1초 미만의 시간 딜레이를 가지고 나중에 컨택이 동시에 마지막에 동시에 닿도록 조절해 주는 목표로 생각하면 되는 건가요?
So here is a case that illustrates that. This is a patient who had advanced periodontal bone loss on this lateral, but also on bilaterally maxillary posterior teeth. And we extracted the bad lateral, and we removed the posterior teeth on the maxilla, and ultimately we did bone grafting and reached the place of having posterior custom abutments and anterior tooth preps. And then we delivered the prosthesis. Here are the paper marks. There's no way to see the timing in the paper marks. There's no way to see the forces in the paper marks. So we really don't know whether the occlusion is good in this picture at all. So the initial T-scan data is here. And you'll see the anterior is overloaded, the right implants are overloaded, and the left implants actually are pretty good. They come together late. I can play that again.
시점을 한번 잘 보세요. 보면 오른쪽 임플란트 있는 것들은 마저 닿고 왼쪽 맨 뒤에가 아직 안 닿고 있는 거 볼 수가 있죠.
Stop. I apologize. You can see the anterior overload to the right implants overload, and then the left implants come together. So the left side is actually in a pretty good time delay already.
타임 딜레이가 뭔지 갖다가 알 수 있을 것 같아요.
So in the same way that we just did with that denture prosthesis, we go through the process of adjusting the highest forces, correlating the marks, the articulating paper marks to the T-scan data.
이제 덴처에서 마찬가지로 보면 많이 찍힌 부분이 어딘지 봐가지고 조정할 거고.
And this is an interesting contact. It's more forceful than the neighbor, but look at the difference in mark size.
비슷한 건데 막 사이즈가 차이가 확 나는 걸 볼 수가 있죠.
This is less force, bigger mark. This is more force, almost no mark. And this is the highest force, very small mark.
그래서 저게 이제 호수라고 하는 걸 그대로 뭐 간단한 것 같지만 잘 생각해보면 간단치도 않아요. 그건 이게 교합지 두께가 뭐 10이라고 치면 저거 10만큼 찍힐 수 있는 부위가 저 크기 차이가 나는 거로 생각할 수가 있지만 그거하고 상관없이 포스가 나타나는 건 또 그렇지도 않잖아요. 이게 다 지금 저 스프린팅 돼가지고 붙어 있는 거잖아요, 그죠?
So going through the process later, where everything is pretty moderated force-wise, there's only one remaining forceful contact in the anterior, and that's the distal of the 2-1.
다 비슷하게 잘 컨택이 이루어지고 있는데 한 군데 21번 치아의 안쪽에 굉장히 높은 컨택이 있는 걸 발견했죠.
But again, without the T-scan, it might be thought that the lateral was forceful, or this premolar was forceful, but you can see they're very low force, and here's very high force, much smaller mark.
저게 제 임상에서는 저기 만약에 그 스프린팅이 안 돼 있다면 시야가 밀리거나 하는 걸 통해 가지고 알 수 있는 방법도 있지만 전체가 임플란트하고 또 연결이 돼 있는 것 같은데 저렇게 연결이 돼 있을 때는 우리가 다른 방법을 써가지고 포스 갖다가 게시하는 것들이 불가능하기 때문에 스캔 말고는
You can see, just like in the denture case, knowing which marks to treat is crucial to getting a good occlusal end result. So when we get to the end of this sequence, turn this off again, and play this. Now you'll see there's anterior uniformity, and posteriorly the implants maintain a low force and come together later than the anterior teeth. And that's by design. So if we compare the two preoperatively, you can see the overload in the anterior. The right implants are very forceful. The left implants are actually, as I said, late and reasonable. But compared to the end result, uniformity anteriorly, no overload. Implants later bilaterally, no overload.
The time span is about 4 or 5 seconds.
It's about, here it's 0.2. It's actually longer in the second recording. It's about 0.2 of a second from first to last contact here, and here it's about 0.3 of a second.
How to instruct patient, like
Just to close, just to bite.
Just bite.
Yeah, bite down and hold.
Bite down and hold.
And bite down and hold. They have 2 bites. And then you can look at the sequencing of when they close, and the time delayed end result, it's actually longer than the first. The first recording is actually longer in time, shorter in time than the second one, because the delays allows the implants to come together later. So it's about 1/10 of a second difference.
1/10 of a second.
Yes.
처음 알 것 같은데 저 정도의 타임 차이가 눈으로 보일 만큼 되네. 딜레이가 되어 보이는 거가. 어쨌든 뭐 별도로 이제 뭐 천천히 보려고 그러든지 그렇게 뭐 인스트럭션 하는 건 아니고 그냥 바이트하고 물고 있으라고 하는데 저 임플란트하고 섞여 있을 때 타임 딜레이가 되는 것들이 TScan 문제 나타나는 걸 보여주신 거고요.
So that's closure. But in excursions, we want to remove lateral stress from the posterior implants so that we reduce shear and lessen friction. And friction is very damaging to the implants as well as to the occlusal materials. And that lessens muscle activity, which is a very powerful problem we have in dentistry where tooth contacts can elicit high muscle activity or low muscle activity.
임플란트 고쳐서 이제 아까 센축에 대한 것들은 이렇게 타임 딜레이가 했고 레터럴 갈 때는 보신 것처럼 레터럴을 줄여주고 없애줘야 시어 스트레스 줄여주고 뭐 하구동 제한을 서페이스 프레셔도 없애주고 머슬 낮춰주고 하는 효과를 얻을 수 있거든요.
So here's an example of a patient first closing on some implants and then sliding left in the same recording. So this is where they close, here they slide left, and in both circumstances, the left implants are under extreme load.
Extreme load?
Extreme load, extreme force.
두 번째 보면은 여전히 레터럴 갈 때 그쪽 임플란트한테 포스가 많이 걸리는 것을 알 수가 있구나.
And when we use the companion EMG, we can see that when the patient moves left, that there's high muscle firing. So that occurs here to the right of this line. So in this recording, the patient is holding their teeth together here, and then they slide left here. When they slide left here, you see muscle firing between C and D. That's where the implants are under frictional stress.
홀딩했다가 C에서 D로 갈 때 이제 레터럴 부분을 하는 건데 레터럴 갈 때도 보면은 머슬에 이게 지금 EMG하고 같이 붙여가지고 오잖아요. 붙여봤을 때 여기 머슬에 여기 액티비티가 나타나는 것을 갖다 보여주고 있고.
But when we correct it to where when the patient moves left, they move anteriorly, and the implants are discluded in a very short time frame, see the muscle activity goes away.
그래서 이제 레터럴 익스커션 되는 걸 갖다가 프리션 되기 때문에 없어지고 나니까 머슬 액티비티가 레터럴 갈 때 딱 없어진 걸 갖다 바로 보여주고 있죠.
And this phenomenon is what relieves the implants from shear stress and potential breakage.
저렇게 이제 교합을 해주고 확인을 하니까 그렇게 이제 레터럴 갈 때 머슬 액티비티 줄어든 거 인해가지고 액티비티가 남아있다면 시효가 많이 걸리고 메카니컬 페일리어가 약이 될 수 있는 상황이 될 텐데 그런 거 줄여줄 수 있는 효과를 갖다가 결론적으로 얻을 수 있는 거고.
And that principle we can apply to the natural teeth as well. And it actually is a way to treat TMD symptoms by controlling the time that back teeth are under excursive contact.
자연체도 마찬가지로 이제 들어갈 때 포스 줄여주려고 해가지고 TMD 시스템을 갖다 줄일 수 있는 이유도 이것과 같은 머슬 액티비티가 확 줄어드는 거에 효과를 본 거고.
So when we have this companion EMG, we can see what the occlusion is doing to the muscle physiology at the same exact time.
두 개가 이제 회사가 딴 회사예요. 딴 회사인데 딴 회사 만들어진 거 갖다가 이제 뭐 컷이라고 그러더만 이제 붙여가지고 작동을 시키니까 교합에 의해 가지고 머슬 액티비티가 달라진 것을 바로 볼 수가 있는 거거든요.
And so in this recording, the patient is occluding, holding their teeth together, and then making a right excursion. And in that right excursion, the blue quadrant is in charge, which is the posterior right. So this patient has working side group function. And that creates high muscle firing to the right of the C line.
저기 커트하면서도 레터럴 스포전 갈때 파란색으로 많이 나타나는 부위들 이걸 펑션을 시작하게 되니까 머슬 액티비티가 계속 많이 유지되고 있고 파이링되고 있는 것 같다 보여주고 있는 거죠.
The posterior group function elicits very high muscle firing, but we can change that into an anterior guided excursion where you see instead of the blue quadrant being in control, the red quadrant is in control in a very short period of time, and then all the muscle activity goes away.
It's not the relative value. It's the absolute value.
It's raw electrical output. It's raw electrical output. Raw electrical output.
그래서 이제 전체적으로 옮겨놓고 나니까 머슬 액티비티가 확 줄어든 걸 보여주고 있죠.
So the difference between these two situations, and this is the same patient, is that here the anterior guidance takes over in 0.3 of a second, but here the anterior guidance never takes over. Posterior group function is in control. That creates high muscle firing.
What the colors matching this?
Yes. Same. The lines here are the same colors up there.
맞아요. 보면은 바꾼 건가요? 그래서 빨간색으로 보이고 있는 부위에 이제 컨택이 일어나는 거 시점을 같이 배치해가지고 그렇게 돼요.
And when we remove the muscle activity, the TMD symptoms go away very fast.
저게 우리가 여태까지 배웠던 건 TMD 시스템이라는 게 이제 크로닉하기 때문에 어플라이언스 끼든지 하고 나면은 시간이 한참 지나고 나야 이제 나타나는 거로 하는데 머슬 액티비티가 달라지는 거로 보여준다고 하고 이제 뭐 예를 봐가지고는 머슬 액티비티가 달라지는 심부터도 그냥 바로 없어지는 그런 것들이 굉장히 많이 돌아다녀요. 실제로는 잘못 봤으면 좋겠는데. 예.
And this therapy is a very powerful approach to treating TMD. It involves no splints, no Botox, no chiropractors, no physical therapy. It actually works from within the central nervous system.
그 이유가 이제 CNS에 영향을 줘가지고 컨트롤하기 때문에 그런 뭐 시간을 주거나 다른 처치하지 않고도 TMD 시스템이 이제 바로 없어질 수 있다라고 이제 설명하신 것 같고.
And it's called disclusion time reduction, which means the time it takes to make an excursion and have the back teeth disclude. By shortening the time, you turn the muscle activity way down.
지난번에 얘기했던 것처럼 레터럴 할 때 음식을 선택되는 시간을 갖다가 확 줄여주는 거 굉장히 중요하다는 말씀이죠.
The disclusion time is measured from where the excursion begins until where the anterior guidance takes over. So in this pre-op, the disclusion is infinite. The anterior guidance never takes over. But in the post-op, the anterior guidance takes over within 0.3 of a second.
그러고 나니까 0.3초 안에 보는 대로 빨간색이 확 급격하게 올라가는 걸 보여주고 올라가면서 머슬에 확 줄어드는 걸 보여주고 있죠.
And these changes are in the same visit. These aren't months later. This is the same day. So here's a patient who underwent exclusion time reduction, and she'll tell you what it's really like. Today we have Paula Schubert here, who's been treated with exclusion time reduction. This is her 1-week follow-up appointment, and I asked her to report on her symptoms and what she came in with and how she's doing after 7 days.
I had a lot of dental treatment done about 2 years ago. I had some crowns and some overlays and inlays done on all quadrants of my teeth. And after that, my bite was just completely off. And I had a lot of pain in biting, a lot of heat and cold sensitivity, particularly cold sensitivity, a lot of difficulty relaxing my teeth and jaws, even just when I was not chewing, just in a regular holding pattern. And agonized basically for 2 years, wondering what I could do. And I happened to come across Dr. Kirstein's information on the web and knew I had to get in here. And 1 week post-treatment, I feel as though my jaw has completely relaxed and has been allowed to come forward more. I was particularly feeling a lot of sensitivity on the left side, but it feels so much better now. Cold sensitivity is starting to decrease. I'm much better able to chew harder foods, things like broccoli or carrots or things that have more snap to them, nuts in particular, where before I really had to bake them and practically suck on them. Now I can actually bite on them, which is just amazing to me. So I feel that there's just been a tremendous improvement.
So what treatments did you have after the crowns were made? You had the dentistry done. What did you try to do for help?
So actually, I went back to the original dentist several times, and he would use the blue tapes and just try to grind down the teeth just from looking at the regular blue tapes. Like I said, I probably went back to him about 4 times, and I was classified as someone who had an extremely sensitive bite, which just annoyed me because I knew there was a lot more going on in my mouth than that statement. I felt as though I was sort of being dismissed a little bit. And then I tried 2 other dentists who were very sweet and tried to help me, but I just could not get the relief that I now feel from this procedure.
Did they use carbon paper?
Yep, carbon paper only. There was no other.
They didn't use computerized?
No computerized bite analysis, no. And in fact, the first dentist, the one who actually put the crowns on in the first place, I can't remember the name of the instrument, but it TENS, I think it was called, where they try to relax your jaw so that you are biting, and I guess would be your normal pattern. And he would use that in conjunction with trying to do the carbon paper, but it was not helping me. That wasn't helping.
That's where they would relax your muscles, putting these on your face, but you would get pulsations.
Yes, the pulsations. Yes, exactly.
And that
Exactly.
had no therapeutic use.
It didn't, and in fact, I told him to stop using that because I felt that it wasn't representing what my bite was actually doing without it. And even though he thought maybe it looked okay when using that machine, when I would go back to my regular life, it was obvious that I wasn't able to bite in that same fashion. So I was still having tremendous forces on my teeth that were making it miserable for me.
Anything you would like to say to another patient who might be thinking about will have these kinds of problems?
Yeah, I would highly recommend it. I think the therapeutic value is tremendous. Just the relaxation response I've been able to get in just this 1 week is so worth it, and I'm so happy that I found Dr. Kirstein, and I would suggest anybody do it if they feel the need.
You don't wear a splint.
And I don't wear a splint. No, I don't sleep with a splint at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a typical patient. 1 week, major improvement, because the treatment works through the central nervous system, which I'll explain to you in a minute.
보신 대로 여러 번 고생하고 테스트도 하고 여러 가지 했는데 효과 못 봤는데 여기 시간 줄여주는 거 하고 난 다음에 일주일 만에 효과를 봤다고 하는데 일주일 만에 효과를 볼 수 있는 이유가 부치부에서 컨택되는 시간이 CNS에 작용하기 때문에 그 줄여주기는 일주일 만에 효과가 볼 수 있다고 하고 그 얘기를 설명하셨다고 하고요.
So she said some very interesting things, which are common descriptions of how TMD can onset. She had some dentistry done that threw off her bite. That's very common. That's one of the most common things that I see. She couldn't chew hard foods until after her bite was corrected with the TCN EMG. She had cold sensitive teeth that also couldn't be corrected until after she had her bite corrected with the TCN EMG. She had jaw tension in an ongoing way, and she didn't have to be chewing. She also was treated with TENS. TENS is where you get hooked up to this electrical device that pulses your muscles, trying to relax them. But as soon as you take off the TENS, teeth start to come back together and cause these problems again. The TENS never really works. And she was dismissed as a sensitive bite patient, which is very common. You're smiling. It's something that happens a lot. Well, Mrs. Smith, you're too sensitive. You can't. We can't help you. And that's not the case at all. The precision of the occlusion has to be very high for these patients, much higher than people who don't have these problems. And the only way to make it high precision is to use a measurement technology. And of course, they didn't use the T-scan. They didn't use the T-scan. They just guessed at the paper marks. Right? Guessing at the paper marks, you can't ever get high precision end results.
또 그런 환자들 우리도 날마다 보죠. 오늘 좀 특별하게 또 그런 환자들을 몰려왔는데 토요일이라 그런지 여기 보면 이제 뭐라 그럴까 이렇게 좀 이게 이상한 환자라기보다는 그런 톨러런스가 좀 낮고 프리사이즈하게 해주지 않으면 안 되는 환자들이 뭔지 치료를 할 수 없는 환자들은 아니라고 하는 생각을 좀 하실 필요가 있다고 보는 것 같고요.
So exclusion time reduction treats a number of common TMD symptoms, and this has been studied for a long time. The first paper on exclusion time reduction was 1991. And these are common TMD symptoms that will respond to exclusion time reduction. It's for muscle problems, not for true internal derangements like blocking and dislocating.
네, 91년도부터 이제 너무 처음 시작하셨던 건데 그런 것들을 가지고 있는 환자들이 이제 DPR을 하는 거에 이제 인디케이션이 되는 환자들.
So what exclusion time measures is duration of time it takes a patient to move laterally and disclude their posterior teeth. And here you can see the patients moving laterally, and they don't disclude their posterior teeth. Right? This is a class 1 post-orthodontic patient with canine guidance. So just because you have canine guidance doesn't mean you disclude your posterior teeth. It's actually very rare that people disclude their posterior teeth.
그래서 이제 포스테리어 디스크션 타임을 매주하는 거는 이제 부치부가 이게 되는 레터럴 무브먼트 시에 부치부가 이게 될 때까지 시간 같은 이야기하는 거기 때문에 캐나일에서 가이드가 일어난다고 해가지고 부치부가 또 바로 빨리 이게 되는 건 아니잖아요. 그래서 지금 내가 왼쪽은 저녁 사이트여가지고 저녁 때 내가 한번 잘 해보고 효과가 어떤지 한번 보고 싶어가지고 저녁 시간 한번 기대해보세요. 오케이?
So what we found was that this group function contact on the working side causes elevated muscle activity through the mechanism of the periodontal ligament. And that's the neuroanatomy that I'll talk to you about in a second.
PTR 컴프레션을 통해 가지고 이제 그 머슬 하이퍼액티비티를 갖다 이야기한다라는 거가 기적으로 설명하는 거고요.
And here you can see again the patient has canine contact, but they don't disclude their back teeth. And what long disclusion looks like is lines of articulating paper. You see there's a line there, there's a line there, there's a line there, lines. That's friction on the teeth. That's what long disclusion looks like.
프릭션에 있게 되면 교합지를 찍었을 때 포인트를 지키지가 않고 이렇게 라인으로 나타나는 교합 흔적들이 많은 경우가 이제 저런 인디케이션 중에 하나로 검사 결과로 나타날 수 있는 사인 중에 하나로 생각하고.
In 1991, we did a paper on how this timing affects muscle activity. So we used EMG, a different EMG than today, and when a patient would make an excursion, they had back teeth in contact, the muscles would remain elevated above rest. And then when we would shorten the disclusion time to very small numbers, less than a half a second, that same set of muscles would function much lower, actually 10 times less muscle activity.
그러니까는 91년도 JPD의 아티클이라고 하시는데 아테카먼트의 그 EMG 결과를 보니까 이건 빨간색으로 보이는 것들은 하기 전이잖아요. 그러면 디스커션하고 난 다음에 머슬 액티비티가 굉장히 높은 걸 보이고 있는데 시간을 갖다가 줄여주고 나니까 10분을 줄었나요? 줄여놓고 나니까는 머슬 액티비티도 굉장히 줄어든 것을 확인을 했죠. 그러니까는 디스크루전 타임을 갖다 줄여주고 나니까 머슬 액티비티가 줄어든 거는 이제 EMG 갖고 하면은 이제 우리도 볼 수가 있을 거고 그렇게 했을 때 이게 이제 들으니 보는 TMD의 심텀들이 없어지는지에 대한 거는 사연 설명하는 거는 이제 CNS에 작용을 하기 때문에 그게 급격하게 빨리 없어질 수 있다라고 이제 이야기를 하시는 거고 어쨌든 측정을 해가지고 알 수 있는 거는 우리가 디스플레이션 타임을 줄어드는 거는 볼 수가 있을 거고 또 동시에 이제 EMG 갖다 걸어놓고 보면 머슬 액티비티가 줄어든 것도 이제 눈으로 볼 수 있을 거고 그런 거의 결과가 TMD의 증상들이 어떻게 완화되는지는 이제 뭐 관찰이 좀 필요한 것 같고.
So today we use very sophisticated technologies to be able to measure the disclusion time and to treat these problems. We can use three-dimensional jaw tracking, EMG, T-scan EMG, which is something that we're going to use today, clinical demonstration. And these powerful technologies allow us to treat the occlusion to very, very high precision.
이 두 가지를 갖다 섞어가지고 하게 되면 이제 교합에 대한 분석을 굉장히 프리사이즈하게 할 수가 있게 될 거고, 그러니까 교합에 대한 프리시전이 요구되는 환자들한테 좋은 효과를 볼 수 있을 거다라고 말씀하신 거죠.
So I'll show you an example of how this works. This is a typical patient, 35-year-old Caucasian female, had orthodontics when she was a teenager, and you can see she has a group function. She doesn't disclude as she moves to the right.
예를 때 교합 치료하고 이제 30대가 됐는데 그만큼 할 때 쪽에 이제 그 펑션을 갖고 있는 걸 보여주고 있고요.
So when we look at her T-scan EMG, she bites down fully, she holds her teeth together, she slides to the right, and again, the right side is controlled by the working side posterior teeth, that's the blue quadrant. The anterior guidance doesn't really work until here, about 1.3 seconds after she starts sliding to the right.
디스커션을 했는데 우리 오른쪽 아래 하늘색으로 보이는데 컨택이 이제 많이 남아있고 또 남아있으면 그거하고 여기까지 이동을 했는데도 전치부 쪽에 빨간색으로 보이는 컨택이 나타나지 않는 걸 갖다 볼 수 있죠. 안테나 가정수 없이 부치부에서만 그런 펑션으로 지금
So in the EMG, she bites down, holds her teeth together, slides to the right through here. And you can see when she slides to the right, she has high temporalis firing, high masseter firing, high masseter firing.
그 ABCD가 있잖아요. ABCD가 찍어주는 건데 C가 이제 2개가 시작되는 부위겠죠. 시계되는 부위를 봤는데 그때도 2개가 되고 있으면서 굉장히 머슬 액티비티가 템포럴 머슬하고 마세터 머슬의 액티비티가 높게 기록이 되고 있을 수가 있어요.
So if we watch this play, now she's sliding to the right, and her center of force goes directly into her molars. She has a group function, which you can see on the T-scan data. And the EMG, she's firing these muscles very high. And they only start to go down as she gets closer to the anterior guidance taking over. You see they reach their lowest level when the anterior guidance takes over. But their highest level is right near the central fossa. Because nobody slides all the way out to the right or left. They chew and function right around the central fossa. So right near line C is where the high muscle activity does its most damage.
아마 저분이 실제로 전방부에서 가이드가 일어날 때까지 거리가 굉장히 있는 분이어갖고 있는 분이다 보니까 그게 실제로 발생할 때까지는 머슬 액티브가 굉장히 오랜 기간 동안 남아있는 걸 갖다가 할 수가 있어요. 보면.
So then we can change that, rearrange that by changing the occlusal function. So here she has more space, although she still has premolar contact, and it appears that she discludes better when she moves to the right.
이제 아까 봤던 거 기억나시는지 모르겠는데 6번에 굉장히 근접해 있고 컨택이 있던 걸 다 없애줬죠 이제.
So in the post-op, you see she bites down, holds her teeth together. Now she moves to the right, and you see the red quadrant takes control right away. That's the anterior guidance. And the blue quadrant disappears very fast.
6번에 또 컨트롤 없애주고 난 다음에 오른쪽으로 이제 레터럴 무브먼트 시키니까 빨간색 그래프가 확 올라가는 거 보이고 그렇죠. 파란색 컨택을 앞으로 확 줄어들고 있잖아요. 그러니까 구치부 쪽에 구치부 쪽에서 이제 가이드 되는 것들이 없어지고 전치부에서 가이드가 분명하게 역할하는 걸 보여주고 있고 EMG를 보면
And then in the EMG, she bites down, holds her teeth together, moves to the right, and you see the muscle activity is almost gone.
그러니까 이제 저게 우리가 아는 대로 구치부에서 컨택될 때 이제 그게 우리 거꾸로 치아에 굉장히 괴롭다는 얘기를 했잖아요. 치아에 괴롭다는 얘기를 했는데 그게 이 양반을 보면 이게 거꾸로 하는 건 거지. 컨택이 구치부에 컨택이 있을 때 머슬 액티비티가 높게 남아있기 때문에 얘기를 하는 거고 구치부에서 컨택을 없애라고 얘기할 때는 거꾸로 이게 뭐 10.5 가깝기 때문에 거기서 컨택이 되면 위하다고 얘기를 했었는데 우리가 보통 얘기하던 거하고 전후관계가 다른 것 같아요. 인과관계가 다른 거니까 원인과 결과를 다르게 이야기하시는 거예요.
One foot. Try that again. So you can see that as she moves, quickly she reaches her anterior guides, and then the muscle activity drops out very fast. And that's how we control muscle overload, and we control symptoms that way.
안테리어 가이던스를 전방에서 가이드가 만들어주니까 구치부 쪽에 머슬 액티비티가 안테리어 가이던스 바꿔주고 난 다음에 확 없어진 걸 보여주니까 그로 인해 가지고 TMD는 이제 없어질 수 있다 라고 얘기를 하신 거죠.
So in here the disclusion time is less than 0.4 of a second. I think it's 0.34. And that's a good guideline to go by. Before treatment, the disclusion time is 1.34 seconds. 1.34. Yes.
시간이 이제 1.4초 정도 이제 걸렸는데 아까 바꾸고 난 다음에 보니까는 1초 미만으로 줄었잖아요. 디스플레이 타임이.
So the difference between when the excursion starts and when the disclusion occurs is the key to controlling the muscle physiology.
지금도 해봐요. 그러면 지금 커피가 없어 왜 당연히 시간이 줄지? But my question is, if with the posterior teeth contact during the excursion, so why the contact time is so long? Even with the contact of the posterior teeth, the patient can move fastly or.
Yes, they don't move fast or slow. They move with a very similar speed. One of the studies we did, published in 1997, we had 30 subjects. Each person made 8 movements to the right and 8 movements to the left. We took a mean exclusion time. So if you were 1.5 seconds, your 8 would be 1.4, 1.6, 1.5, 1.7, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, not 0.2 and 3.2. And because we don't tell the patient speed, we just have them move. So the movements are very repetitive. And that study showed of the probably 30 subjects, there were 30 times 8, 2,400, 240, something like that. At least, no, there were 240, 480 measurements made. They were all statistically significant. So people move with the speed they move. We don't tell them speed. We say bite down, slide left.
그런 얘기인 것 같네. 무슨 얘기야? 무슨 얘기하신 거예요? 그러니까 지금 얘기하신 게 그러면 환자한테 뭐라고 인스트럭션을 하지 않아도 구치부에서 컨택이 있게 되면은 그 지금 얘기하는 1초 미만의 스피드로는 디스크션을 일으키도록 과학 운동할 수 없다는 얘기인가? 평균적으로. 그러니까 그게 환자가 조절한다고 해가지고 조정될 수 있는 게 아니다는 얘기. 오케이.
You understand?
오케이.
So in 1993, I published a paper that explained the mechanism, which is essentially that the back teeth rub together for prolonged periods of time. The periodontal ligament of the posterior teeth travels directly into the brain, which is the only peripheral nerve to do that, and it makes these muscles contract. And unless the teeth are changed, the system makes for high muscle firing, and then the symptoms build up over time.
왜 기부치부에서 컨택이 길게 일어날 때 TMC부터 생기는지에 대한 메커니즘을 93년도에 이제 프레리오 발표하신 건데, 컨택이 일어나게 되면 리가멘트의 컴프레션을 당하는 시간이 길어지고, 거기서 나오는 너브 엔딩은 나중에 얘기하시겠지만 다른 애들하고 다르게 바로 CNS로 들어가가지고 머슬 액티비티를 갖다 높이고, 머슬 액티비티 높이게 되면 또 안 좋은 쪽으로 악순환이 돌아가고, 그렇게 해가지고 피로도가 쌓이게 되는 그런 거로 이제 기전을 설명하셨어요.
So as the person uses their teeth just to chew and eat, normally, if they have long exclusion, they will overwork these muscles, and then if they're susceptible to that overworking, they become symptomatic.
그래서 이제 씹는 걸 갖다 계속 무의식 중에 그렇게 씹지만 씹다 보면 이제 씹으면서 굉장히 뭐 피곤하고 못 씹고 하는 이야기를 아까 왔던 그 아저씨와 했던 이야기 똑같네. 씹을 수는 있는데 씹고 나면 너무 피곤하고 씹을 수가 없고 환자 얘기네.
And that mechanism has to do with the unique neuroanatomy of the periodontal ligament, which is the only peripheral nerve in the central nervous system to actually synapse inside the brain. All peripheral nerves, except for the posterior periodontal ligament mechanoreceptors, synapse outside the brain. So the PDL is the most unique peripheral nerve in the entire human body.
그러니까 이제 너브 중간에 여러 개 시냅스 통해 가지고 들어가는 것들이 일반적인데, 우치부의 PDL에 있는 그 너브만 다이렉트로 CNS 안에서 브레인 안에서 시냅스가 이루어지기 때문에 우치부에서의 레트럴시의 컨택을 조절해주는 거가 메커니즘적으로 유용하고 중요하다는 말씀하신 거죠.
So the molar periodontal ligaments and premolar periodontal ligament fibers travel into the mesencephalic nucleus, and there they do not synapse, they pass through and travel on to synapse with the trigeminal motor nucleus bilaterally.
그래서 트리저미널 모터 뉴런의 바로 안에서 시냅스가 직접 일어난다라고 하는 걸 갖다가 아틀라스에서 보여주시는 거고요.
And in the trigeminal motor nucleus, synapses with all of these muscles. Let's blow that up. All of these muscles.
저런 것들이 전부 다 같은 데서 아까 시냅스가 일어났던 그 머슬에서 같이 이제 이노베이션이 된다고 얘기하신 것 같아요.
And these muscles are all involved with the swallow reflex.
이제 연화운동, 연화관세에 관여하는 것들이고, 스트릭들이고.
So when you swallow, put your teeth together, your throat closes, your ears close, and all of these muscles respond to that mechanism by working together. But in the TMD patient, that same swallow mechanism backfires and creates lactic acid buildup and symptoms in the same muscles from just using your teeth.
그래서 TMD 환자의 경우에는 또 거꾸로 소알로잉할 때 생기는 그런 이게 자극을 줘가지고 이제 TMD 환자들은 반복적으로 머슬의 이제 컨트랙션이나 액티비티를 갖다 만들어주기 때문에 증상이 점점 더 악화되는 그런 기전을 설명하시는 것 같아요.
And this is why the symptoms are always the same when you talk to TMJ patients. They get headaches above their eyes, which is the temporalis. They get facial pain, which is the masseter. They get tired chewing, which is the masseter. They have ear symptoms, which is the tensor tympani, which is the muscle that controls the tympanic membrane. A lot of people have weird sounds in their ear. They get tight under their mandible. They get tight in their throat. Those are all the muscles that are responsive to the swallow mechanism.
하셨죠? 이렇게 거꾸로 이제 TMD 환자인 분들은 과도하게 그 저부에서의 이제 그 액티베이션이 있고, 여기서 너브 액티베이션이 또 머슬 작용을 해가지고 그 근육들이 계속 지속적으로 피곤한 상태가 되니까 똑같은 시스템들 갖다 이야기하게 된다는 거죠.
So the treatment, disclusion time reduction, is so powerful that within a week, chewing mechanics can improve. We just finished studying this. We're going to publish this paper it just was accepted in April, where we studied chewing before and after disclusion time reduction to see how quickly someone would respond to treatment.
추위 패턴을 갖다가 비교하신 거죠.
And you heard from the patient in the video that she could chew much better at 7 days. So we wanted to study that phenomenon. I've been hearing that from patients since 1990, 1991, that they could chew better once they have their exclusion fixed. So we decided to study that.
줄 지나고 난 다음에 괜찮았다는 얘기를 하셨는데 그것을 어떻게 설명할 수 있을지 갖다가 이제 비교해보기를 하셨고요.
So to do this study, we used the jaw tracker, the BioResearch jaw tracker, and the BioResearch EMG, and we had the patients chew gum, which is a non-destroyable food source. You can keep chewing gum. You know, it won't get ruined. So you can have someone chew repeatedly for a long period of time.
껌을 갖다가 이제 씹으면서 저희는 좀 설치하고 EMG 같이 걸어놓고.
So the way we take this data is a magnet is adhered to the lower front teeth. The person then wears this jaw tracker. Their muscles are measured, and they chew 20 times with the gum on the left side. They keep it on the left side, and then they chew 20 times on the right side, keeping the gum on the right side.
그래서 이제 껌을 갖다가 20번을 왼쪽, 20번을 왼쪽 하는데 이게 이제 또 봤죠? 그다음 아래 이빨에다가 지금 자석이에요, 자석. 주광역 자석을 갖다가 양면 테이프를 통해 가지고 딱 붙여놓고 이렇게 뭐 머리 뒤집어 쓴 거가 이제 그 자석의 움직임을 갖다가 이제 기록을 하는 거지.
And each of these chewing strokes is then calculated in all 3 dimensions to determine what's called an average chewing pattern.
이제 저걸 갖다가 위에서도 디텍터가 있고 머리 꼭대기에 있는 거, 그다음에 양쪽에 뿔 양쪽에 있는 것도 이렇게 해가지고 3차원적으로 하악 운동의 하악 전체의 움직임이 어떻게 되는지 갖다 수업을 하고 합쳐가지고 평균적인 추잉 패턴을 갖다가 계산을 한 거예요.
So this is a pre-treatment average chewing pattern for one of the subjects. And these black lines are normal chewing. And you can see here this patient is supposed to be chewing to the left, and they actually are chewing more to the right when they're supposed to be chewing to the left. Sagittally, they're supposed to be chewing under their chin, but instead they're chewing forward of their chin. And horizontally, instead of chewing out to the left, they're chewing behind their head to the right, which shows you how dysfunctional their chewing pattern is before treatment.
그래서 이제 그런 것처럼 검정색으로 보이는 것들이 3차원으로 보여주는 거죠. 빨간색으로 보이는 그 제일 왼쪽에 있는 건 속도고, 빨간색으로 보이는 검정색으로 보이는 거가 일반적인 경우인데, 오픈은 빨간색, 하늘색은 폴인데 그 오른쪽으로 안 가고 왼쪽으로 가는 거. 사진처럼 봤을 때도 뭐 남다르게 갖고 계신 걸 갖다가 여러 가지 볼 수가 있죠. 이게 치료 전에 하악운동이 저렇게 계산이 된 거고.
So then after we would do that, we would measure their disclusion time with the T-scan EMG and treat this high muscle firing. So here's the post-op of that. This is the patient's left excursion, and you see the difference after shortening their disclusion time, how little muscle activity there is compared to pre-treatment.
그래서 이제 하고 나니까 결국 아까 계속 봤던 것처럼 멋을 줄는 것 같아 보여주고 있고요.
And then we had them come back at 7 days and reevaluate their chewing.
뒤에 와가지고 추잉 패턴을 갖다가 다시 이제 측정을 했어요.
And so here, if you compare the average chewing pattern beforehand, it's smaller, not as broad as it is post-operatively, much wider, much more vertical. This is 16 millimeters tall. This is 20 millimeters tall. Much broader chewing stroke.
추잉 스트로크를 갖다가 봤을 때 옛날보다 훨씬 더 옆으로 넓어지고 아래로도 편하게 이제 버벌링가 들어올 수가 있고.
And then in the frontal view, where they were chewing on the right side of their head instead of chewing on the left side of their head. After treatment, you can see they're chewing, the blue is inside the ellipse, just a little bit outside what is normal, but now they're chewing on the left side of their head.
프로테스 봤을 때도 이제 치료하기 전보다는 패턴이 많이 이제 정상으로 생각하는 게 가까워지는 것이고.
Sagitally, this patient was chewing in front of their chin. Post-operatively, they're chewing under their chin. And in the horizontal, here they were chewing to the right and behind their head. After treatment, this is normal. You see they're following the normal. They're chewing out and to the left.
그러니까 보면은 그 전에는 뭔가 뭐를 피해가지고 막 슈잉 패턴이 나타났던 것 같은데 고치고 일주일쯤 지나고 나니까 패턴들이 보통 생각하는 쪽으로 정상적으로 돌아온 걸 갖다 보여주고 있어요.
And so statistically, what we found was that chewing cycle timing was greatly improved. So here you can see that the person here, pre-treatment, opened, not the person, this is all the subjects. The timings went down, meaning they chewed faster. So here they opened in less time. They closed in less time. They spent less time making contact on their teeth. And the whole cycle time, whole chewing cycle, went down.
그러니까 이제 통계를 딴 사람이라고 얘기하는데, 그러니까는 시간이 많이 편하게 신속하게 효율적으로 씹는 그런 통계치들 갖다 보여주고 있죠.
And the p-values are very, very low. When you have a p-value that's a p less than 0.05, it means that 95% of the time the change will occur. When you have p-values that have many zeros, it means 99% of the time or greater, the change is statistically significant.
p-value 굉장히 낮은 거.
And we also saw some changes in opening velocity and closing velocity. So here, the speed of chewing went up. Pre-treatment, it was lower than post-treatment. Closing velocity went up. Average opening velocity went up. And average closing velocity went up.
왜 보면 이제 속도가 굉장히 빨라진 것 같다고 볼 수가 있고 뭔가 주저함 없이 씹을 수 있게 됐다라고 해서 볼 수가 있을 것 같아요.
So they could open and close faster. Their entire cycle timing was faster. And the mechanics of their cycle timing was much faster. And you see that here. This is a single subject's pre-treatment muscle cycle of a single chew. And this is post-treatment of a single chew. You can see the amplitude is much higher. There's not a lot of choppiness after treatment. There's much more smooth curves in the muscle from pre to post.
What's the meaning of choppy?
Choppy would be, they don't make a complete stroke. They stop, they slow down. Here you can see they make a continuous stroke.
치료하고 나니까 머슬이 그러니까 뭔가 좀 덜 피곤해가지고 뭐 원활하게 운동을 하는 것들이 이제 피크로도 나타난다라고 하는 거죠.
And this is a very interesting graphic. This is one subject's all their single chewing stroke broken down by muscle. And you can see that they're sort of haphazard and non-uniform. After treatment, all the muscle cycles are almost coincident.
One patient.
This is from one example.
그래서 한 사람이 머슬이 피곤하니까 균일한 운동이 안 나타나는 거죠. 그런데 지나고 나니까 골프할 때도 저런 뭐가 있으면 항상 균일한.
So this is why the patient you heard in the video could have improved chewing within 7 days' time. Because once the high muscle activity is removed by changing the exclusion time, the mechanics of muscle physiology respond, and the chewing cycle becomes simpler, faster, stronger. And that's also along with the symptoms of TMD going away.
결과적으로 아까 얘기한 치료에서 타임을 갖다 줄여주고 나니까 머슬 피지올로지 정상적으로 돌아왔다라고 하는 것을 실험적으로 보여주는 경우가 좀 찾아봐요. Okay.
So the important point to understand here is none of these things could be accomplished without the technologies. There'd be no way to treat the exclusion time. You can't measure it in any way without the T-scan. You can't follow the muscle changes without the EMG. And you couldn't know what the chewing function was without the jaw tracker. So in the modern era, these are the staples of treating occlusal problems.
그래서 저런 결과를 보여줬는데 그걸 갖다가 치료가 되고 있는지를 갖다 알 수가 없는 부분인데 우리 얘기했던 여러 가지 그 도움을 통해 가지고 이 도움을 통해 가지고 결과를 확인할 수 있고 치료를 하게 되더라도 치료가 제대로 됐는지를 갖다 확인할 수 있다는 거죠.
So I'll just explain this to you, and then we can. I don't know what time we're supposed to finish. It's 30 minutes. Okay.
그렇죠? 3시 반? 3시 반까지 이건 하면 되는 거죠. 네? 3시 반? 3시 반, 30분. 네, 30 more minutes.
So the key element that we're treating is working side group function. And working side group function actually makes the most muscle activity, not balancing contacts. Working side is the damaging element in the occlusal scheme for the muscle physiology.
근육 생리적으로 본다면 밸런싱 사이드에서 인터페런스 있는 것보다 워킹 사이드에서 펑션을 하는 게 더 괴로울 수 있다라고 얘기를 하시는 것 같아요.
And this is a important thing to understand because dentistry has thought biomechanically that the balancing contacts were the problem and working side contacts were okay, but it's actually the reverse. Working side contacts are the damaging contacts, not the balancing side. In terms of muscle harmony and muscle physiology.
근육생리학적으로 볼 때는 우리가 이제 밸런싱 사이드 컨택이 안 좋다고 얘기했던 것들이 역학적으로 얘기를 했던 거잖아요. 피벗과 이렇게 해가지고 그쪽이 안 좋다고 얘기했던 건데 우리가 이제 이비잼해가지고 알 수 있었던 결과를 측정한 결과를 가지고 이야기를 한다면 근육생리학적으로는 워킹 사이드 인터페런스가 훨씬 더 아까 얘기한 근육생리가 정상적이고 건강하게 돌아가는 데서 유의할 수 있다라고 하는 얘기를 하신 거예요.
In 2012, we published a paper that analyzed 45 dysfunctional subjects, treated them also, and we determined from that with the T-scan EMG that the most common high muscle firing element was working side group function.
45명을 대상으로 해가지고 봤더니 머슬 액티비티를 갖다가 굉장히 그 하이로 이제 오버액티브하게 만들어가지고 문제를 만드는 컨택이 워킹 사이드 컨택이었다라고 하는 걸 갖다가 발견하셨다는 아티클이고요.
So here's an example of that. This is a headache patient, and you can see she has a work side group function despite having hand-on contact. And when we look at her T-scan EMGs, you see that she has a working side group function and very high muscle fiber in the right temporalis, which is why she has headaches.
펑션이 있던 분이었던 거고 헤데익이 있었는데 헤데익이 있었던 이유가 일단은 저기 머슬의 템포럴 머슬의 액티비티가 굉장히 오랫동안 지속이 되고 있는 걸 EMG 통해가지고 알 수가 있었어요.
And in this version of the T-scan, the posterior teeth are in purple, the purple quadrant. And here again, the patient bites down, holds their teeth together, slides to the right, and you see the purple quadrant never discludes.
저 그래프 볼 줄 알죠? 저기다 합쳐져 있는 거 검정색 그래프고 넷으로 4분위로 나눴을 때 색깔을 본 거잖아요. 그런 보라색이 이제 구치부죠. 오른쪽 구치부인데 이해가 됐는데도 불구하고 그게 다른 저기 연두색이나 녹색 마냥 확출을 두지 않고 영상만 좀 확출을 두지 않고 남아있는 것들 볼 수가 있죠. 컨택이 구축적에서 계속 이루어지고 있다는 거죠.
So the group function persists, and that causes the high muscle fiber.
그룹 펑션이 있는데 그걸 갖다 EMG하고 연동을 해가지고 보니까 그룹 펑션이 있는 동안에 머슬 액티비티가 계속 높게 이제 파이어링 되고 있는 걸 갖다 보여주고 있는 거죠.
And notice the balancing side has very low force contact.
밸런싱 사이드 컨택도 있긴 한데 포스는 워킹 사이드보다 굉장히 적은 컨택이 남아있는 걸 볼 수가 있고요.
And therefore, it's a minimal contributor to the muscle physiology.
그 때문에 머슬 액티비티가 높아지는 거는 뭐 양이 많지 않다라고 하는 걸 알 수가 있고.
So then we went ahead and treated the prolonged exclusion, which is, remember I said lines of articulating paper. You can see all these lines. That's what the long disclusion looks like.
그러니까 이제 프릭션이란 컨택이 있을 때는 이렇게 라인으로 점을 찍히는 거 말고 라인으로 컨택이 나타나는 건데 이분들이 그런 컨택을 보이고 있고.
And reduce those lines to point contact per tooth, except for the anterior guidance.
지금 알고 있는 나머지 분 다 말려가지고 라인이라는 점으로 나타나도록 배열 조정을 시행한 거고요.
Although you can see there's a line right there, very short line.
축제 하나 남아 있고.
So it's very difficult actually to treat the disclusion time down to zero. There's always some friction that remains. The goal is to make it as short as possible.
저거 갖다 고항내에서 배열 조정을 완전히 제거하는 거가 단박하게 쉬운 일은 아니지만.
So then, when we remeasure her, she's sliding to the right again. It appears that she discludes visually. And then, we look at her T-scan EMGs. So here you see the center of force travels to the anterior teeth, and the red quadrant takes over instantaneously.
컨택이 일어나고 있는 오른쪽 전체 쪽으로 이제 중심점 이동하는 걸 바로 볼 수가 있고 이미지를 보면
And then the muscle activity after C is greatly reduced.
저건 이제 우리 렐러티브 값이 아니라고 했잖아요. 알다 보니까 전압값하고 바로 비교가 되는데 확 줄어든 모습을 있어요.
Remember, C is where the excursion begins. That's what you can see here in the EMG.
네, 오픈하면서 EMG에서 연동돼가지고 확 줄어든 걸 보여줄 수가 있습니다.
So if you compare the pre-op to the post-op, dramatically less muscle activity.
줄어든 게 보이죠?
And this, of course, lessened her headaches, lessened her jaw pain, lessened her overall symptom condition.
This kind of muscle activity is, without the habit of the crunching, I wonder how much of time of the day this kind of the muscle activity happens due to the screen time, prolonged screen time.
It's a good question. It's during normal function. And if someone clenches, it obviously is worse.
But without the kind of the crunching habit, I wonder with the group function is not automatically or the happen during the normal life.
Yes, it occurs during their chewing mechanics.
During the
chewing. Right.
The chewing time, actual chewing time is not a big number of minutes, but even so, such a short period of time can affect the kind of the discomfort of.
Yes, because it builds up over years.
Okay.
Right. So the person starts out with their teeth. Let's say they finish tooth development age 15. Right? And you see the symptoms show up when they're 20, 25, 30. Right? That's what happens. Right? So muscle activity is building on a daily basis. And then it becomes, at some point, too much for the patient's tolerance to it. Right? And swallowing also adds to it as well. So you swallow 1,000 times a day.
얘기하죠. 이게 뭐 지금 우리가 보통 이기잼할 때처럼 크렌칭 헤빗이 있거나 그런 사람이 아니면은 우리가 교합지점을 검사하는 것 같은 그런 컨택을 만들고 하는 거 얼마나 되겠어 하루에. 근데 이제 그거가 이제 시간이 지나면 굉장히 누적이 되고 근육의 피로도가 쌓이기 때문에 시간이 지나가지고 언젠가는 발현이 될 가능성이 높아진다는 거죠. Okay?
So this idea of working side group function being problematic is a major departure from what is being advocated in occlusal theory. Right? Working side group function was thought to be okay because it distributed forces across many teeth. Right? That's biomechanically thinking, not neurophysiologically thinking. Right?
그러니까 이제 우리가 뭐 신체가 아닌 뭐 저기 뭐냐 뼈덩어리나 그런 걸로 생각할 때는 그럴 수가 있겠지만 바이오메카닉을 생각하면 그렇지만 이제 뉴로머스큘러적으로 생각을 한다면은 우리가 생각했던 것은 다른 시각에서 봐야 될 필요가 있다는 거예요.
So without technology being applied to the teeth and to the muscles, we would never know that. We would still think working side group function was a good thing, when it's actually the most damaging design.
그러니까 이제 우리가 저런 걸 기계 써가지고 측정을 하고 확인을 하기 전까지는 이제 그게 워킹 사이드 우리가 괜찮다고 얘기하는 그룹 펑션 정도까지는 워킹 사이드 그룹 펑션까지는 뭐 괜찮다라고 생각을 했었지만 그게 측정을 해가지고 실제로 보니까 그렇지 않을 수도 있겠다라고 하는 걸 알게 됐다는 거죠.
So for many years, leaders in occlusion would publish that working side group function was acceptable. And here you see from Glickman's text, Perry-Donald text, you see a graphic of working side group function being acceptable. Dawson's second edition, 1989. Okeson, 2003. And even today, Dawson, from TMJ to Smile Design, is still talking about working side group function being okay. And this is because occlusionists have not been thinking neurophysiologically. They've been thinking biomechanically. But with technology, we now think neurophysiologically. Much better way to think.
제가 적혀 있는 거 보시죠. 매주할 수 없던 시대에는 바이오메카닉으로 죽어있는 것을 생각해가지고 하다 보면 저렇게 생각하는 것들이 타당할 수가 있는데 뭘 생각하면 그런데 실제로 측정을 하면서 보니까는 뉴로로직하게나 뭐 피지올로직하게는 그렇지 않은 것들이 이제 측정이 되고 알게 됐다는 거죠.
What's interesting about this is that in studies, working side group function was never treated in any occlusal adjustment study until the paper that I wrote in 1991. And prior to that paper, dentists who did occlusal adjustment studies only treated centric relation and centric occlusion interferences and balancing side interferences. And then they drew the conclusion that TMD and occlusion were unrelated because people didn't get better, right? So they weren't treating the right thing. And instead of realizing maybe we aren't treating the right thing, they decided occlusion and TMD are unrelated because they thought they were treating the right things, but they were actually treating the wrong things.
그러니까 아시죠? 그러니까 이제 바이오메카닉을 생각할 때는 그렇게 하면은 해소가 돼야 되는데 해소가 안 됐어. 해소가 안 되니까는 이제 결론을 내는 거가 교합하고 TMD하고는 상관이 없는갑다라고 이제 설명을 했다는 거죠. 근데 그 바이오메카닉을 생각했던 것들이 혹시 그와 이제 근육생리하고에 맞지 않는 그런 전제였다면 그 교합이 TMD하고 상관이 없지 않다고 얘기할 수 있겠다는 거지, 그렇죠?
So to treat the disclusion time, we use a procedure called immediate complete anterior guidance development, which is very different than occlusal equilibration.
이제 우리가 목표로 삼는 것들이 immediate complete anterior guidance development.
And I first wrote about it in 1991. And it focuses on excursions. Does not involve centric relation at all. It's treated from the MIP position. And it's all about excursive function.
중요하게 생각하는 거가 이제 센트릭보다는 뭐가 됐든지 간에 센트릭보다는 MICP부터 시작을 해가지고 레터럴로 갈 때 디스커전 시에 어떻게 하는 거가 이제 굉장히 중요하게 작용을 하는 교합 프론트하는 데 있어서 팩터라고 하는 생각을 가지게 됐다는 거예요.
And there are significant differences between equilibrating and doing ICAGD. The most notable ones are you don't need a splint, you don't need an articulator, you don't need a diagnostic cast. You do it all digitally. And the most significant difference in the theory is equilibrating, you want to make centric relation and centric occlusion the same. In ICAGD, you want to time the posterior disclusion to be less than half a second. Those are very different goals.
So in the concept of ICAGD, there is no requirement for the centric position.
Just an MIP. Just where the patient bites down. Much simpler for the dentist, much simpler for the patient.
지금 좀 전통적인 거하고 비교했을 때 이제 목표하는 거 자체가 달라진 건 거죠.
So using MIP simplifies treatment for the patient and for the doctor because we don't have to reposition the mandible.
MIP부터 시작하는 데면 그러니까 이제 조인트 중심을 해가지고 센치고 갖다가 리포지션 시키는 것부터 다시 시작하는 그런 어려움은 해소할 수 있기 때문에 클리니션한테도 프랙티컬할 수 있겠다라고 얘기하시는 거고.
And I first published these differences in 1993.
그러면 처음 비교를 갖다가 얘기하시는 거고.
So this therapy is not new, but it's new in that most of us weren't using the T-scan in 1985, 1991, 1995. And only now, in 2015, 2016, are people taking the T-scan as an important tool. So this approach has been around for a long time, but because the T-scan has been slow to reach acceptance, this therapy has also been slow to reach acceptance.
저는 이제 아이디어 리서치만 그럴 때 입증하거나 측정을 해가지고 보여주거나 할 수 있는 방법이 없었는데 이제는 건강에서 많은 분들이 스캔을 향한 측정하고 할 수가 있기 때문에 지금 좀 달리 받아들일 수 있겠다라고 얘기하신 것 같아요.
So I'll show you one more case, and that will pretty much take us to the end. This is a woman who had TMD symptoms for a long time and had 20 splints made over a 25-year period, but her occlusion was never treated.
25년 동안 20개 이상의 스프린트를 가지고 치료를 받았는데 이제 부상은 나지 않죠.
So here, when she's moving to the left, you can see she has a curved plane of occlusion, posterior group function, no posterior exclusion at all, abfractions. Look at that abfraction, pretty serious abfraction. And in her left excursion, you see the center of force goes into the molars, and the orange quadrant, which is posterior left, is in control of her movement. The anterior left works much later.
저기 이제 아시겠죠? 이제 측가 운동을 가기 시작할 때 부치부가 오렌지로 보이는 부위가 굉장히 오랫동안 선택이 유지가 되고 있고 전치부에 그린으로 보이는 부위가 이제 이게가 측가 운동을 시작할 때 얼른 지휘를 갖다 수량을 해야 되는데 지휘를 갖다 못하고 굉장히 측가 운동이 많이 진행이 되고 난 다음에야 이제 테이크오버하는 것다 볼 수가 있어요.
You see the center of force goes backwards. Here's where she closes, and then when she moves left, this moves backwards. That's not good. That means forces go up on the posterior teeth in the excursion.
excursion할 때 이제 심해 중심점이 보면은 앞쪽으로 가야 될 것 같은 뒤쪽으로 이동하는 걸 볼 수가 있고.
And then here we see after the C line, very high muscle firing in the left temple and the right and left master muscles.
그래서 이제 EMG가 같이 해가지고 봤을 때도 그 시점 지나가지고도 머슬 액티비티가 굉장히 높게 나타나고 있는 걸 볼 수가 있고요.
And notice that the right temporalis doesn't fire at all, except for some spasm late in the movement.
오른쪽에 템포럴 머슬은 거의 뭐 액티비티가 없는 거를 갖다가 보여주고 나중에 학점 지나고 난 다음에 스트레칭이 보여주고 있어요.
And this is normal neuroanatomy. The non-working temporalis never fires. So if you move left, your right temporalis turns off instantaneously. If you move right, your left temporalis turns off instantaneously. And that actually is a good marker for where the excursion begins.
이제 저기 이제 정상적으로 왼쪽으로 이동할 때 오른쪽이 이제 활동을 전혀 안 하는 거가 정상적인 거를 보여주는 거고.
So here's another example of working side group function causing high muscle firing.
굉장히 오랫동안 유지를 시켜가지고 피곤하게 만든다라고 하는 것을 다른 이해가 되겠고요.
So these are the teeth on the left side, and this is the long disclusion. You see the lines on the premolars, in between the premolar and the canine. On the lower counterpart teeth, you see the lines and the friction. And what we do is we treat these counterpart contacts. So we would treat lingual to lingual contacts. And I'm just going to show you where they line up to each other. lingual to lingual again, lingual to lingual again. Right? These are lingual to lingual contacts are powerful activators of high muscle firing, which we cannot see from the buckle at all.
그러니까 링걸 쪽에서 컨택되는 것들이 이제 머슬 액티비티를 높이는데 굉장히 중요하게 작용하는 것들인데 이걸 버컬 쪽에서 봐가지고 전혀 알 수가 없는 컨택 포인트죠.
So then you have a balancing contact here when the patient moves to the right. That's this contact on the lower. And you have working side group function on the buckle, counterpart on the upper. On the premolar, working side group function on the buckle, working side group function on the buckle. The same, working side group function on the first premolar, counterpart, working side group function on the buckle. Those are all the contacts we would treat.
컨택 전부 다 이제 손을 봐야 될 컨택이고요.
So when we correct it, we can see visual space there, except maybe back here. And this is the kind of pattern that represents short disclusion. Almost no friction. A little bit there, a little bit here.
조정하고 나니까는 이제 부치부치 조금 닿는 거 말고는 라인을 보던 다 없어진 거를 확인할 수가 있고요.
And you can see how they sort of line up to each other. This contact still needs to be removed. This is the guidance on the canine now, and that we would leave. So then we would re-record, and we see a lot less muscle activity. What are the features that change? The center of force goes to the anterior teeth. The green quadrant takes control. The orange quadrant disappears.
조정을 한 다음에 우리가 기압 조정 활용했던 것들이 이제 제대로 되는지 확인이 되는 거죠. 이게를 시작할 때, 30파운드로 갈 때 전치부에서 굉장히 빨리 테이크오버해가지고 인들을 시작을 했고 지부에다가 오렌지는 또 급격하게 없어진 것들을 볼 수가 있어요.
And C to D are very close together. Essentially 0.3 tenths of a second, 2.5 to 2.8 something. So let's say 3 to 4 tenths of a second. That's a good post-operative disclusion time.
그러니까 10파운드 시작을 해가지고 완전히 이게 식을 때까지 1분 미만, 1초 미만으로 굉장히 짧은 시간에 이게가 완료가 된 걸 갖다가 확인할 수가 있습니다.
So if we look at the two T-scan recordings before and after treatment, the differences are visible in a number of places. First, the center of force. In the preoperative condition, it goes backwards into the posterior teeth. Postoperatively, it goes anteriorly. We'll do it this way. Postoperatively, it goes anteriorly. That's a big difference.
이제 치료 전후를 갖다 딱 비교해가지고 보니까 이제 그 치매 펜타점이 아까는 구치부 쪽으로 이동하면서 끝났는데 레터럴 갈 때 이번에는 전치부 쪽으로 가면서 끝나는 것 같다 볼 수가 있죠.
And in the graph, the orange quadrant is in control of the excursion for a long period of time, essentially from 3.3 seconds until 4.9 seconds. So 1.6 seconds. And the green quadrant doesn't work until late in the excursion. Postoperatively, the green quadrant takes over right away, and the orange quadrant disappears in 3 tenths of a second. And then the change in the patient's physiology. Very high muscle firing, C to D far apart. Very low muscle firing, C to D close together.
이기가 시작될 때부터 이게 완료될 때까지 시간도 굉장히 길고 그 기간 동안에 머슬 액티비티도 굉장히 많이 남아있는 것을 볼 수가 있었는데 부치부치 컨택되는 건 많이 없어졌고 나니까는 시간도 줄고 액티비티도 그 사이 액티비티도 많이 발생 안 하는 것을 볼 수가 있죠.
So you can see we're talking about things in the occlusion that are very different than what you might have heard before. Fractions of seconds that matter, parameters on computer screens that matter, measurable force differences and timing differences that matter, not we should have bilateral simultaneous contacts and all teeth should hit at the same time. That's like a gross oversimplification of what the occlusion can really be when you use these technologies and how precise it has to be in order to make it work physiologically for someone.
그래서 우리가 지금 오프에 볼 T스캔이나 T스캔이나 EMG 같은 사용하게 되면 이전에 우리가 그냥 결과로서 개념적으로 가지고 있던 거 다른 목표들을 갖다가 가지면서 교합에 관련된 프랙티스를 할 수 있을 거다라고 주장하신 거예요.
So you have access to these very powerful tools here in the clinic, which is a really wonderful thing. And this will help you to install better dentistry and control occlusal problems better. You know, if you put a set of crowns in on the upper left quadrant and you deliver a group function, the periodontal ligament doesn't know there are crowns up there. It has no idea there are crowns up there. Right? So you give the person a group function, now they fire their muscles too much, and they come back and they say, you know, my head hurts since I got my new crowns, or I'm not chewing as well since I got my new crowns. Now we understand why. Because we installed a design that overworked the muscles.
환자들이 와가지고 그런 이야기를 안 하는 거는 어쩌면은 전후관계가 있지만 상관이 있을 것 같다라고 생각하는 환자들이 생각하기에 상관 내지는 인과관계가 있다고 생각하는 거는 이렇게 치고 와가지고 얘기를 할 거예요, 그렇지? 뭔가 보철물하고 난 다음에 보철물 때문에 머리가 아픈 거는 연관이 있다고 생각 안 하기 때문에 얘기를 안 할지도 모르지. 근데 이제 뭐 툴들이 있고 하니까. 근데 여러분이 전통적으로 배웠던 전통적으로 배웠던 것들하고 여러분 아직 뭐 전공의 과정이니까 우리가 거기까지 동의할 수 있을 것 같아요, 그렇지? 구치부 그룹 펑션을 갖다가 유익하다라고 얘기하는 사람은 아무도 없어요, 그렇지? 놔둬도 괜찮을지도 모르겠다고 얘기를 했던 건 거지. 그래서 이제 구치부 그룹 펑션을 갖다가 줄여주는 지금도 봐가지고 뭐 선생님들마다 어떻게 배우시는지 모르겠지만 억셉트 할 수 있는 부위는 소고치 정도까지 컨택되는 것들은 뭐 피할 수 없다면 억셉트 될 수 있는 그 측방운동식 겸 양식인 것 같고 구치부에 있는 것들은 이 이야기가 아니더라도 구치부 쪽에서 워킹 사이드라고 하더라도 컨택을 갖다가 되지 않도록 줄여주는 것은 굉장히 중요한 것 같고 근데 이런저런 환자가 가지고 있는 톨러런스나 아니면 그거에 대한 요구도가 높은 사람이라면은 지금 생각하고 있는 것들 갖다가 이렇게 매저를 통해 가지고 머릿속에 드는 철학적인 것도 보이는 것들이 아니고 디바이스를 통해 가지고 확인을 하면서 시술을 정의해 보는 것도 한번 좀 생각해 볼 수 있지 않을까 싶어요.
Yes. So, as you can see, having access to these technologies makes occlusion much more of a science than a subjective art. And that is how we have learned to practice using these amazing technologies that you guys now have access to. So I hope you take the time to learn about them and use them in your prosthodontic residency. And you know, they're capable of helping you install much better prosthodontics. I use them all the time to install all my cases, and I try to achieve these very high precision results because every patient who we put teeth into can come back and complain that the bite isn't good. And some of you may have already experienced that, where you put in something and they came back. And without these technologies, it becomes very difficult sometimes to resolve them. So it's better if you install well at delivery these high precision end results, or if you adjust someone's bite to make it a very high precision end result, then the physiology works optimally. But if the end result we give someone with a bite adjustment or with a denture, well, not so much with a denture, but let's say with natural teeth or implant dentistry, we create problems that result from not delivering a high precision end result. Only through measurement technology can we offer that service to our patients. So I'm glad you guys have these technologies available to you, and I hope you get to use them. And I want to thank Dr. Shim for translating for me. And I'll look forward to taking questions if you guys have any questions.
What's the give thanks to 또 질문 있으시면 질문하는 걸로 하고요. 오케이. Every patient, every patient have a chance to experience with teeth scan?
Well, I think you were asking if they were asymptomatic and they needed crown and bridge work that we were going to make. Yes, you can take preoperative T scans and try to replicate that. It's easier said than done, to be honest with you. So more practical is you take the T scan data as a guideline, and then when you deliver the case, you can try to create the same profile, but it's not always exactly the same. In this era, with digital scanning, it's more possible because you can scan the teeth that are shaped pretty well, and then you can reproduce them anatomically. And then you have a similar force pattern. But if you make all new occlusal surfaces and you make all new artistic forms, then the T-scan will help you create a functional end result that's very high precision. But duplicating it is only possible if you can really duplicate the tooth surface. If I was going to restore the posterior teeth, yes, because what happens is, well, you heard it from this woman, right? My patient, she had all these posterior teeth done. They gave her a group function. They didn't know that, and then her symptoms went off the charts, right? So something, I don't know the reason, but when we crown teeth, and this is something you should keep in mind, things change for the worse very fast in a lot of patients. So we can put in a quadrant of crowns and suddenly we now have a TMJ patient. A week later we have a TMJ patient. Whereas if we, just do minor restoration and don't change the bite too much, it doesn't influence that very much. So yes, if I was going to crown someone, 8 teeth against each other, I would give them anterior guidance, posterior disclusion in a very short time frame. Because it's a safe physiologic design. Yes.
Is the increased muscle activity in the group population, is that because of the signal from the PDL, or is it because of the contact location of the muscle?
Well, it's the contact location provides the medium which compresses the PDL for far too long. And because of the synapsing, if you push on your molars and your premolars, you get muscle activity. That's why in all the EMGs, when the patient was biting down, you saw lots of muscle activity when they were holding their teeth together. So all we have to do is put our teeth together and all these muscles contract. And that's because of the swallowing. So the locations of the contacts just magnify the periodontal ligaments effect. You can have them only on the buccal, you can have them only on the lingual. The physiologic response is almost the same.
And how about the patient with implant cases?
It's a very different situation. The friction creates resistance to free movement in the implantation. So it's kind of like a denture patient who, when you have implant, against implant. So the friction doesn't trigger muscle activity from the PDL, it triggers it from the resistance to free movement. And so it's more of a mechanical response rather than a neurological response. But it's a good question. I spent a lot of time in Canada. There's a group that does all-on-4, all-on-6 restorations. It's all they do. And they were having a lot of trouble with these restorations, breaking them, patient discomfort after insertion. So they asked me to come with the T-scan and help them. And when we gave these all-on-4s, all-on-6s anterior disclusion rather than group function, the patients were like, wow, that's a lot easier to move, it's much simpler, it doesn't feel as bad. And when we used the EMGs on them, the muscle activity went down. It's not as profound as with the periodontal ligament, but it's a real issue. It's much more mechanical resistance and sort of like a barrier to free movement, but it still elicits high muscle fiber, and then it causes damage from that. But it's different than in the natural tooth patient.
이해했죠? 이해가 안 가는데 어쨌든 구치부에서 필로렌트 리가먼트가 없는 그 임플란트 환자 케이스들에도 그렇게 액티비티가 가지는 않더라도 교환면에서의 쿠션 때문에 하악 운동을 갖다가 스무스하게 이행되지 못하게 하는 어떤 그런 교합적인 요소가 있으면 마찬가지로 머슬 액티비티가 오랜 동안 파이링 돼가지고 피곤하게 만드는 것들이 발견이 되고 피델이라는 자극이 없더라도 이제 그걸 갖다가 오른손이나 오른식스에서 구치부 쪽으로 갖다 이개시키고 전치부에 의해 가지고 전치부든 구치부든 그 빠른 이개를 시켜가지고 머슬 액티비티 떨어뜨리고 나면은 환자가 불편해하는 것들이 좀 줄었더라라고 하는 걸 갖다가 발견했다고 하는 얘기인 것 같아요.
Do you recommend the canine guidance into implant cases or?
I would say anterior group function.
Anterior group function.
And so that would be canine lateral central as a progressive anterior guidance. Because when you have single point guidance in a full arch implant restoration, you have a tremendous single place of tension right, on the prosthesis itself. So if you can get more teeth involved, it's going to be better. But it isn't something we know the answer to. It's just logical. Sort of like group function is supposed to distribute force over many teeth. It's the same idea. But moving it forward reduces the degree of shear that you can apply. So I'd try to make it canine lateral central.
우리가 원래대로 뭐 쉬어 스트레스 걸린 거는 작아지니까 캐나에 하는 방법보다는 프로그레시브하게 전방으로 이동하면서 판테이크 발견할 수 있도록 해주는 거에 판테도 이용할 수 있겠다라고 말씀하신 것 같아요. What do you think about the zirconia?
Well, I go myself towards the softer side. So I do a lot of composite to metal and things like ceramage, really very easy to repair, very kind to the infrastructures, the abutments, things underneath. Other people would say go with something very hard that they can't break. So again, we don't have the answer. But I think in terms of practicality, because the last thing I want is a big fractured thing in my patient's mouth that I have to fix. Right? Once you make something, if you have to fix it, it's not good. So I go softer, which can absorb stress better, myself, in those patients. That doesn't mean I'm right. That's being practical. There is a system that uses the T-scan sensor that the TechScan makes. It's called the iScan, which measures raw force, absolute force. But the T-scan is designed to be a clinical tool, measuring relative force. There is an add-on in T-scan 9, which you guys have T-scan 8, I think it's 8, which allows you to export the raw data that's under the surface into an ASCII file and work with it in Excel. But it's not a common add-on. You have to purchase it as part of the program. So the industrial uses, when someone wants real force, absolute force, then we use what's called the iScan. And it basically is you put a T-scan sensor into it, the patient can bite on it, and you can get pounds per square inch or units per square centimeter, whatever it is you want to measure. But it's much more of a research entity than a treatment entity. Because in practicality, if I bite with 500 newtons per square inch and you bite with 300 newtons per square inch, it's not really relevant to treating you, right? You're going to bite with your force no matter what it is, right? So that's where relative force is very helpful clinically. You need to know where there's too much in your mouth and where there isn't enough, where it's concentrated, where it's extra. You don't need to know that it actually is 100 pounds per square inch there and 75 over here, right? So the T-scan makes that very simple for you. But there are people who want the raw data for research purposes, and that's where they would either get the ASCII2 add-on or buy an iScan. An eye scan is 3 times as expensive as a T-scan. There's nothing that competes with the T-scan. I think because it has had such a struggle to regain acceptance, no one else has wanted to build one. You know, it's been, of all the digital tools that you have available to you, it's been the most resistant technology, and yet it's the most helpful technology from a practical standpoint, because everything we make, from fillings to implants against implants, there's an occlusal adjustment phase, right? If you do a quadrant of composites, there's an occlusal adjustment phase. If you do single crown, there's an occlusal adjustment phase. So a lot of dentists struggle with occlusion in their practice because they're choosing these marks by eye and they're guessing badly. We actually did a study, I don't know if you probably saw the study or maybe I talked about it. We published a study where we showed dentists six pictures of paper marks, very much like these pictures I would show you, a quadrant, and we had them choose the most forceful contact and the least forceful contact in the picture. And so there were 300 dentists who took the test. They only scored 11% correct. 11% correct. It's like 90% of the time we're going to guess wrong. And that's what it is, it's guessing at ink spots. Right? So it makes no sense that the T-scan has been resistant, but it makes sense on another level because it's much simpler to use the carbon paper. Think about it, you put it in the mouth, patient bites, we think the data is correct, we look at the marks, we say, okay, that one's forceful. Right? And the patient says, no, Dr. Kirstein, what did you do? That's the wrong, that doesn't feel good. Right? That happens all the time. That happens all the time. So the T-scan is the most relevant digital tool you have because it's going to be used many times during a day. You might scan an arch full of implants once every 3 or 4 months if you're lucky, if you're busy that way in your practice. But you'll put in a lot of single crowns and a lot of 2 crowns and a lot of 3 crowns next to each other, and that's where the occlusal problems start. You heard it from my patient. She had some crowns and inlays done and threw her bite on. Happens all the time. So no one is trying to compete with the T-scan because it's too difficult to break into the marketplace.
Any unrelieved patient?
Unrelieved symptom?
People who didn't get better?
Yeah.
It certainly happens, but it's very rare when you treat the patients with exclusion time reduction. It's, I would say statistically, 85% of the people get better, and 10% get better but don't think they got that much better. Like they'll say things like, well, I don't have as much pain, but I still have a headache and it hasn't gone away, or I can chew better, but you know my jaw still gets tired, but I can chew longer before it gets tired. So there's people that respond but don't respond very well, and then there's a small percentage of people that don't respond at all. And we don't really know what that is. We don't know why that is. So it's in all things in medicine, there's no 100%. If you get pancreatic cancer, most of the time you're going to die. But every now and then, someone survives. So just like in the reverse, we can fix a lot of TMJ patients this way who have muscle problems. But every now and then, someone doesn't respond. We just don't know why that is. Any weak points? Yes, the weak points are that you have to learn how to use it well. It doesn't work by itself. And that is a weak point because a lot of dentists who have it don't really get out of it what it's capable of. And that's because you have to develop skills that you're not taught in school. So you have to learn how to record well, which is a skill. You have to learn how to analyze the data well, which is another skill. You have to be able to tell when the recording is good or bad and throw it out if it isn't good. And you have to be able to transfer the information to the mouth in an intelligent way. So there's a whole series of things someone has to learn that require an effort. And we run into this all the time. Here in this country, we know there are T-scan users who have the T-scan and they they use it, but they aren't sure always what they're doing. And in my own country, sure, people take courses from me and they're like, I didn't know that feature did that, and I didn't know that I could do that, and I didn't understand that, and yet they've had it for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. So the training is the negative point. You have to really learn to use it for it to work. If it doesn't work, you should take it out of the box.
Okay.
Yes?
Do you think by improving their so higher nutrition, do you think that the discount can be a problem to treat chronic TMD?
Yes, we've been, for years and years, that's what we've been doing.
What I was curious about was actual chewing time, like together, and one day is going about.
Yes.
And do you think that is a crucial factor in causing TMD?
It's a factor in how functional use of your teeth, if you have bad disclusion, worsens the muscle physiology, and then as time goes on, the muscles get weaker and weaker. It's kind of like if you exercise your arm with weights forever, sooner or later you won't be able to lift the weights. You won't be able to do it. You may get 10, 12 curls, 15 curls, but eventually your arm will give out, you won't be able to lift it. That's what happens with the teeth and the muscles, but it takes a long time for that to happen. So people get symptoms in their mid-20s and they have a completed bite other than their third molars when they're 12 to 15 years old. So there's not only chewing and eating, which is, I think it's 18 minutes, 15 to 18 minutes a day. You swallow 1,000 times a day. So when you swallow, your teeth come together, all these muscles contract. So then you have talking, right, and yawning and breathing, all which goes on using your mouth. So as you use your muscles, in addition to when they're chewing and swallowing, you have more muscle activity that goes on. And it's like an ongoing marathon where you don't get any rest in your jaw. And then at some point, the combination of all those things, the patient starts to show symptoms. So their jaw starts to hurt when they eat, or they start to get headaches that they never had before. And it evolves in a way that's sort of slow, and then at some point it becomes very chronic. And the nature of just using their teeth is what causes it to evolve and to become chronic. It isn't that they are all clenchers and grinders. That worsens it too, but not everyone who has TMD is a clencher and grinder. So it's really a fascinating thing. It takes years for it to evolve and become a chronic problem. And typically in Caucasian and Asian women, which are the most prolific groups, so you guys fit that group, you see symptoms showing up in the mid-20s. But in the earlier years, the symptoms are there. For example, we have a patient coming today, your friend, and she knows she grinds her teeth a little, and she knows she gets tense when she's stressed out. And those are the precursors of having chronic jaw tension and facial pain. But at this point in her life, it isn't there yet. But she has it, just hasn't gotten there yet. Give her 5, 7, 10 more years, if it goes untreated, she'll be tired chewing, she'll be grinding her teeth more, she'll have more facial pain, because it evolves over time. And the only thing that speeds it up is if someone has a trauma. If they have an accident in some way, if they fell on their jaw or they got hit in the face with the steering wheel, that speeds it up dramatically. But if it evolves on its own, it's a very slow evolution. And it becomes a problem as time passes.
So nowadays, well, medicine department, when they usually emphasize on massage or a M position where you can kind of press it very much. But then, is it like what you're saying is if they do not get occlusal adjustments, they will not be treated even if they keep on doing it.
Correct. And that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. So it isn't an occlusal adjustment. It's if they get their disclusion treated, which can be a number of different things. It can be doing orthodontics, to couple their front teeth if they have an open bite. That will shorten the disclusion. It can be bonding in canine guides where they don't have canine guides. It can be doing prosthodonts. But the general, simplest way is to adjust the teeth, if it's possible to do. So what happens in the therapies that you're talking about is that the person gets them done, but then it stops having an effect and they have to keep doing it. And that's the same with Botox, and the same with physical therapy, and the same with medications, because the primary agent is still there activating their muscles. So they repeat the therapies without really getting resolution. And once their disclusion is changed, they don't need to repeat the therapies. And many of them don't need therapies at all. They stop going to get the Botox, they stop wearing a splint, they stop taking medication. And these things have been studied. This is all in the literature since the mid-1990s. It's just not being tapped, meaning it's not being mainstreamed, because the world has decided that occlusion and TMD are unrelated because of these studies where physical adjustments were done where they treated the wrong things, right? They thought they were treating the right things, but they weren't. So therapies have to be done over and over again to counterbalance the ongoing impact of the teeth. It's fascinating stuff.
저 부분을 동의할 수 있는 부분인 것 같아요. 뭐 이렇게 그 심텀을 치료하기 위해서 교합을 서로 돼야 된다, 안 돼야 된다라고 하는 것을 떠나더라도 그 지금 전후로 해가지고 다 교합이 고철을 통하든지 못 통하든지 교합이 변화가 될 수밖에 없고, 근데 지금 병원 안에서도 그렇고 교합에 대해 가지고 교합 면에 대해서 자신 있게 교합 조정을 할 수 있는 사람은 고철 수술 받은 사람밖에 없어. 다른 사람들은 교합에 대한 뭔가 이게 두려움 내지는 주저함 그런 것도 있어요. 여러분들이 그걸 갖다 거꾸로 생각해가지고 교합으로 모든 걸 다 해결하겠다고 생각하는 것까지는 오버할지 모르더라도 현실적으로 교합에 대한 걸 갖다가 조절을 하고 손을 댈 줄 아는 경험이 있고 할 수 있는 사람은 고철 트레이닝 받은 사람밖에 없어요. 그래서 좀 이렇게 상극이 되는 부분은 있지만 여러분들이 하셔야 될 부분이라고 생각을 해요. So it's time. So it's we call it the end of the first session and have some break. And thank you for your time. 그래요. 그러면은 어디까지? 반에 맞추신 걸 하고 사진에다 한장 찍으면 좋을 텐데 모인 사람들끼리. Just for the memory of the day, so why don't you don't mind? Okay, I'll see you.
고생했어요.
이게 너무 안 보일까?
use it.